Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. Today is our Chaplains in Service on the Native American Religion. Today is March 18th, 1992. I'm Diane Spence. I'm Director of Education and Programs for the Michigan Department of Corrections. Welcome. I plan to ask each of the presenters here to come up to the podium and introduce themselves for today's in-service. Bucko,
Bonjour, Wabanang Indigenous. My name is Dwight Teeple, also known as Bucko, also known as Wabanang, which is in our language the morning star. I'm Ojibwe of the Bear Clan. I'm from Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan. I work for the Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewa Indians, and I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Anita Halpern, and I'm the Administrative Assistant for the Bureau of Correctional Facilities.
Bonjour, Anjanini Nishtakas, Nimkiningwano Dina Nishtakas, Ojibwe Nishnabe, Makwatodam, Bay Mills Tribe of Ojibwe Indians. My name is Andrew Leblanc, and I am a custody officer working at the Chippewa Temporary Correctional Facility. I'm also from the Bay Mills Tribe of Chippewa Indians, and I'm from the Bear Clan. Thank you.
Bonjour, Menase Kwandishnakas, Yakuma Washington Donjaba, Megizi Dodem. My name is Beatrice, and I'm originally from Yakuma, Washington. I'm of the Tlinglit Nation, and I'm of the Eagle Clan. I've received my social work degree from Michigan State University, and I'm currently working with women's groups such as the Cedar Women's Society, and thank you.
Tane Nikan, Nijina, Wabanosa, from the Potowatomi Bokegan band. I'm also grievance coordinator at Lakeland Correctional Facility. I'm associated with the Thunder Clan, and I'm glad to be here.
Good morning. I'm Claire Dinger. I'm the chaplain at the Federal Correctional Institution in Milan, Michigan. I'm very glad to be here this morning.
My name is Dwight Teeple. I'm, as I said, from Sault Ste. Marie Tribe Chippewa Indians. I worked there as a research and planning director. Been in that position for quite a while. But I bring a welcome from our chairman, Chairman Bashore from Sault Ste. Marie Tribe, as well as being the chairman of the Michigan Commission on Indian Affairs. One of the things that he wanted me to leave with you was a brief overview of Michigan Indians. In the state of Michigan, we have, during the last census, 55,638 Indians enumerated. There is an estimation by the Department of Education that that is an undercount and that there is approximately 93,000 Native Americans in the state of Michigan. These Indians reside primarily in 3 different grouping areas, reservation areas of which we have 7. There's Keweenaw Bay Indian Community, Lac Vieux Desert Indian Community, also in the UP, Hannahville Indian Community, Sault Ste. Marie Tribe of Chippewa Indians, the Bay Mills Indian Community, Grand Traverse Band of Ottawa and Chippewa Indians, and the Saginaw Chippewa Tribe. Those are the federally recognized tribes in Michigan. There's also 5 other state-recognized tribes in Michigan, and those are the Bokegan Band of Potowatomis, the Potawatomi Indian Nation, Burt Lake Indian Band, Little Traverse Bay, I'm not sure what Little Traverse Bay Band is what they call themselves right now, and Little River Band that's up by Ludington. Also in Michigan, we have the urban Indian communities, of which there are quite a number of in the major locations such as Grand Rapids, Detroit, Lansing, Saginaw, and Flint. Those are the major locations. They represent, as I said, the approximate 93,000, or whichever you prefer, the 55,638. 3 primary groupings: Chippewa, Ottawa, and Potowatomi. Michigan, in its urban populations, has a large transient population that comes from Canada, and Oftentimes, the commission can assist at finding or verifying, as one of the gentlemen asked here, about Indian people and spiritual leaders. They know who to get in touch with in Canada as well as in the United States. In Ontario, there are 128 separate bands, just like the 7 tribes that we have here. Indian organizations, there's 132 separate Indian organizations in just Ontario alone. The population ratios, approximately 43% at present, are enrolled members of tribal, federally recognized tribes in Michigan, and the remaining balance is in rural or state-recognized tribes. Depending on which census you take, that balance will shift a little bit. And any assistance that the Commission on Indian Affairs can provide, Mr. Bouchard, our chairman, has stated that they would help in any way that they possibly could, as well as the tribe itself, if they could assist the Bureau of Department of Corrections in any way, to call on us at any time. That's just a brief overview of the Indian people here in Michigan. We do have other tribes that are here, as Ms. Peters here represents in the Tlinglit Nation. I myself am Ojibwe, and I was to give a brief overview of Native American spirituality. Oftentimes people use that phrase, and I, as well as many others, don't particularly care for the phrase, because any second-generation American can be a Native American. We prefer Native American Indian, American Indian. Anishinaabeg is the terminology that we use for ourselves. Anishinaabeg is the term that is used for all Algonquin-speaking tribes. The 3 tribes that I mentioned here that are primary tribes in Michigan are of that language stock. There are other tribes that are also a part of that. They include the Sauk, the Fox, the Kickapoo, Miami, Shawnee. I believe at last count there were something like 29 identified separate recognized tribes in the country today that can be traced to that language stock. There are over 400 separate tribes in the United States. In our spirituality, I'm going to try to keep it as simple as I possibly can. I myself follow the Native American or American Indian traditions, have been doing so for quite a number of years. I guess the best way to proceed would be just to talk about the way of our believing. And to do that, we have a number of sacred items. Tobacco probably being one of our oldest items, and that tobacco is used as a form, as a helper. And we as Indian people, Anishinaabeg people, talk to that tobacco. It has a spirit, and we talk to that spirit. And we tell that spirit about those 4 directions that are around us. We tell it about the east. In the eastern direction, we look at it as representing and symbolizing a grandfather. It represents all new things, all new knowledge, all new life. The east is the direction where the sun comes up. It's a direction we look to recognize and acknowledge a new day. It's the direction we recognize as springtime, the direction we recognize as the time when we're little babies. There's a lot of different things that eastern direction represents. It has its own color, it has its own sacred medicine, its own sacred clan animal. When we talk to that tobacco and tell it about that east, we ask and invoke those grandfathers and those helpers that we talk of there to be with that tobacco, to take our prayer to the Creator. The same thing is true with the south. The south is like the noontime. The south is that time in our lives when we're youth or going into adolescence. It's the time of the day that when the sun is straight above. We look at that direction also as a direction of understanding and different concepts. Also the colors. The red is represented there. And in these different representations, or these helpers or grandfathers in those directions, each of them have their own meaning. You know, for example, the red that I speak of that is represented there in the south is representative of the earth and fire, two of those essential elements to life. So we talk to that tobacco and we tell it and ask those things from the south to hear that prayer that we have, that we're putting there in that tobacco. And we're thanking that direction, that south, for all those things that it provides, those things that we just talked of. The same thing is true of the west, the western direction. We talk of the western thunder, western wind, the western grandfather, and those things that are there in the west. For us, that west represents that time in our own lives when we're middle-aged, when our own hair is turning from its natural color to a little bit snow or white or gray or whatever we choose to call it. The west is symbolic of that time of year that we call autumn or fall, when that first frost comes. Also, the west represents that evening and during the daytime, that time when it's dusk, turning from daylight to darkness, a major change in the daytime. The west additionally represents, for Indian people, the transition from this physical life that we have today to that spirit world, that spirit life. And that's the direction that we walk towards in this path of life. North, like the west, the south, and the east, also has its representations. The north represents that time in our lives when we're elders or old people. It represents the winter time, represents that nighttime. It also has the different concepts that are associated in the medicines and different other things and the colors and what have you, also associated there. For example, again, like the color for the south was the red. And again, this, depending on the nation, Indian tribe that you come from, the color may differ slightly or vary somewhat. But north for us is generally considered the color blue, which is the other colors of those four elements. We had red for earth and fire, and the blue is for sky and waters. Those are the four directions that we tell this tobacco, that we're giving thanks for those things that are there in those directions, those helpers and those grandfathers. And we also tell that tobacco, give it a thanks for that direction beneath us. That direction underneath our feet is the direction of our Earth Mother. And we tell that tobacco that we give thanks to our Earth Mother for our food, our clothing, our shelter, our medicines, all those things that help us to sustain our own good life. The parallels of the Earth Mother to our own mothers are recognized and told to that tobacco in that prayer that it will take to the Creator. And finally, we offer that tobacco to that direction above us. And that's the direction we look to recognize and acknowledge the Creator, the Great Spirit. These four directions in our Earth Mother are all helpers in sending that tobacco to that direction above, the Creator. And generally, that tobacco is put on one of our oldest things that we have at a very minimum, and that would be a fire. We place that tobacco on there, and that tobacco will burn, and the smoke that comes from it rises. And that, in it rising to the sky, it's taking that prayer that we've told it to the Creator in our way of believing. Those are the main 6 directions of Native American beliefs, and one of the oldest ways in which to make them prayers. That tobacco, when we make those prayers, are generally prayers for our relatives. We generally, as a rule, do not pray for ourselves. We pray for those that are around us. It's how we live our life, and we have to depend on our relations that are around us to pray for us, to help us have our good life. For our way of believing, for many of the tribes, praying for ourselves is rather selfish, and we have to depend on our own relations to do that for us. You know, they watch us and see if we're doing something wrong, then they pray for us to go away from whatever it is we're doing wrong, or to help us gain strength, have a good life. As I was saying, the tobacco and the fire is probably one of the oldest methods of that very, very simple prayer. You know, I went into some detail about the significance and the meaning of just placing that tobacco on a fire when it's offered those 4 directions. We can talk about the meaning of those directions for quite some time, but just suffice it to say that at a minimum, what you've heard here, you know, is a general sense of how those prayers are offered just for putting tobacco down on fire. And that can be extended out to when you're looking at pipe ceremony, the sweat lodge, and a number of other ceremonies, drum ceremonies, the different things that we have. At this time, I think give it a few moments for questions and answers just on that very simple and basic overview of the spirituality and the Native Americans. Yes?
A couple of terms you use, term tribe and band. What makes the difference between us?
The question was, what determines the difference between a tribe or band? Basically, it's syntax. The United States government has, as a policy, the recognition of separate bands. For example, Sault Ste. Marie has 6 bands that are associated with that area. Those 6 bands are, broken down into Mackinac Band, Niamakan, Sheldrick, Sault Ste. Marie, Sugar Island, Drummond Island, etc. However, in the naming of the Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewa Indians, it names it as a tribe, although it's a separate band, a sub-band within the whole Chippewa nation. Okay? The United States government just simply does not, in its attempt to keep all of the Chippewa people separated, it'll recognize each one as an independent nation. I don't know if that adequately answers you, but...
So bands by locality.
Bands by locality, in our way of looking at it, it's just another band. But by the United States' way of looking at it, the government's way of looking at it, and its policy way of looking at it, is that they are separate quasi-sovereign nations. By being a separate quasi-sovereign nation, we're no longer related.
And how do you see the difference between tribe and nation?
I disregard the term myself personally.
Okay.
I recognize someone that's from Garden River Indian Nation the same as a brother or a relative of me being a part of Bay Mills Indian Community or Sault Ste. Marie Tribe of Chippewa Indians.
You're saying then that the government does not cross bands, that the government is complete within itself?
Each one, yes.
Yeah, okay.
You and Andrew are both from the Bear Clan, so therefore, in your eyes, you're related?
Yes. The question was that Andrew Leblanc and myself are both from the Bear Clan and that we're related. In our way of believing, yes, we are You heard of parallel cousins and cross cousins in anthropological training and classes, very similar to those genealogies. Yes?
Ceremony, we currently have a prisoner doing the pipe ceremony, not knowing his background. Is there problems with that? Not knowing his background in that, with the actual ceremony, or is it something that we should check into further?
I believe that we'll be covering that in more detail down the road here. We have a section at 1 to 2:30 with Mr. Winchester on the pipe ceremony itself, and I believe you'd be probably calling on myself and Mr. Leblanc for assistance during that part. But just for a general overview of the tribes themselves and the spirituality and how that is, glad to answer any other questions. Yes?
Does your clothing have religious significance?
Yes, it does. Wouldn't want to get into all the detail of it, but I'll give you a quick overview of. Pardon me?
We want you to go around the front so you can focus the camera on.
The clothing that I wear at the present time is comes from around the 1812, late 1800 period. And as you recall, in the Upper Great Lakes region, the late 1700s, 1775 through 1812, 1814, 1813 was quite a period of upheaval in this area. We had the French that were eventually driven out by the British that were eventually driven out by the Americans. You'll notice that I have a ribbon shirt is what we call this, and the ribbon shirt is made of 3 different colors. You see the dark, which would be representative of the dark navy that was at that time. Part of the uniforms of the American troops. The red and the red wool was part of the uniform of the British troops. The American cavalry at that time started with the yellow stripe. The Indian people of the Upper Great Lakes held the balance of power up until the War of 1812. And many of the tribes under what's commonly known as Pontiac's Rebellion, Little Turtle, Tecumseh, all of the warriors at the time wore general variations of this kind of clothing. They were already in contact with the fur trade industry for over 100 years already, and were very familiar with European clothing. So this is just a variation of some of that clothing style from around the late 17 to early 1800s. It comes from, as I say, British and American military uniforms. Captured. The necklace that I have on is something that's commonly worn by Indian people. It has a bear claw, it's a bone choker. Early form, if you will, of bulletproof vest. It wouldn't stop no bullet, but in combat, when used with arrows flying around, bones were very effective in deflecting arrows.
Religious leaders in most Native American groups, basically older men. Is that the way it tends to occur? Because the concept of wisdom and passed down knowledge.
The question was, is spiritual leaders of Native Americans generally old? It's a very good question. Much of our tradition is passed on orally, and much of our history is passed on orally. However, to become a spiritual leader, you need not know all of that oral history. But you need to be following the Native American or American Indian spirituality and taking those teachings. You know, we can live a lifetime and not know everything there is to know about certain medicines or even one single plant. There's people of our, there's some of our Indian people that spend nothing but their whole life just learning one plant and all that that one plant can do in different societies within our Indian communities. Medewin, for example, generally a new initiate would be studying 4 plants for their lifetime, and depending on which level they go on there. And there's different levels within that society. The general accepted manner in which someone becomes a spiritual leader today is through a combination of oral tradition, the traditions that are passed on from elders to the younger folks, and the experience of going out and fasting, very much like, you know, Jesus did in his 40 days in the desert. I myself, for example, have fasted. I spent 5 days and 5 nights on an island in the middle of Lake Superior, without food, without water, without tobacco, without fire, without so much as even sitting down, and without leaving a 4-pace circle. That provides you with a very, very powerful experience of facing death. And that death that you face is very real. That is one of the ways that someone becomes knowledgeable in the ways of Native American spirituality.
I understood what you said. In this experience, you said you stood for 5 days. Did I understand you said that?
That's correct.
We can talk further later.
Yes.
In the observance of your traditional religious ceremonies, what is the role of the female, like in the Sweet Lodge or in the pipe?
I would defer that one to Ms. Peters. That question. The question was, what is the role of the female in our ceremonies? I will turn it over to Ms. Peters to answer that.
We find that with our spiritual way of life, we are always seeking a balance. Just as there is a balance within those 4 directions and where we are on that direction, there's also a balance of the male and the female life, whether we're talking about plants, whether we're talking about the bird life, whether we're talking about the thunders in the sky or all the things that come from the earth. All these things have a balance, and there is a balance there within women as well. And that balance is central inside of her at birth. It's a spiritual way of life, and it's an inborn purity that all women have inside of them that allows them to carry life inside of them. Because of that purity, a lot of the things in our ceremonies have that female part to it. There's a female part in that pipe. There's a female way of collecting those plants that we use for that sweat lodge, of collecting that tobacco, of collecting those roots. For the sweat lodge itself, women also nowadays go into that sweat lodge. They go into the sweat lodge in our group. Usually it's just the women that go into the sweat lodge with only women, and with men with only men. I don't know if that answers your question or there was something else.
I'm curious because on the paper that we have read, clothing is not always worn in the Sweet Lodge, and if, I don't know, that would create a problem.
Usually with the women that I know, we carry a towel over us. In fact, we might wear a robe that is made from a towel that ties, and in that way, you know, we would keep our modesty. And we don't like to mix our lodge with the men. We don't know where that man is on his path of spirituality. Maybe he's just beginning. Maybe he's trying to abstain from alcohol. Maybe he has problems with substance abuse. Sometimes adding a woman and a woman's power, sometimes our power is just too great, and it just kind of, it takes all the power from them and it comes to us instead.
Can a woman be a spiritual leader?
A woman can be a spiritual leader, yes. And it doesn't have to be an old woman.
Can she also be a pipe carrier?
Yes. Some of the things, I guess, in line that they wanted me to talk about was, and I guess I'll just go right into it since you've already broached that question. In this item 4 on Native American religion, it says, due to the Native American beliefs associated with the religious pipe and other religious items used in the ceremony, whenever the pipe or other religious items are to be searched, the search will be conducted by a male staff member whenever possible. If a male staff member is not available to search the religious items will either be searched by an available female staff or the religious item will not be allowed into the institution. And I guess I wanted to talk a little bit about that. A lot of the spiritual teachings that we have about women, and I kind of started some of that already, was at birth, because of the women's purity, they already have their path laid out for them. They already have that path laid out for them that they are going to be the nurturers. They are going to be some of the keepers of those traditions, of those faiths for the American Indian people. That is part of what they are about. The other part that women have is that they have a time in their life where they are the most powerful. They have a time when they're very, very, very strong. And this is a time when a young girl at age 12 or 13 comes into her first menstrual cycle. That's a very, very spiritual time for women. And that's a time where we say that a woman has gone to the grandmother's lodge for the first time. And it's a time when her body is changing into a woman, but the spirits are also going to her. It's a time for the very first cleansing of her body with her menstrual cycle. And it's a very sacred time, and it's a very good time. And it's a time that nations recognize her as being someone that is going to be able to carry on that nation further, to carry on that next generation and the generations to come. And it's a very powerful time that she's not any longer treated as a child. She is treated as a strength of her nation. She's treated as a woman and growing well into her womanhood with that first menstrual cycle. And the menstrual cycle itself to women is a spiritual ceremony in itself. If a man goes into a sweat lodge, he's being purified in that sweat lodge. He's being able to sacrifice his body somewhat by that hot steam that's flowing into that sweat lodge. He's sacrificing himself with that pain, or with maybe he might have fasted before that sweat lodge, and he's also giving of his body. During that time of the sweat lodge, there's intense praying going on. There's powers that are aligned with the spirit helpers. Those powers are being called into that sweat lodge at that time. And the same thing that happens with the pipe ceremony. With women, we recognize that women are total and complete in themselves. That women have this ceremony going on in their body during their menstrual cycle. It is a time when women are very, very spiritual. They are more spiritual, I guess, than they are physical during that time. That time their body is throwing off toxins. They're throwing off negative energy, things that were said to you during that week or during that month. You're able to throw off those toxins of that food that you ate. That sodium on your French fries, or the preservatives in your canned food. All this stuff it helps your body to purify itself, because your body has to be as pure as possible to carry that life. If you should become pregnant, your body is sacred, and it has to be very pure, and that's the reason for that menstrual cycle. Well, when your body is throwing off these toxins, that spiritual help is also coming to you at that time. It's a time where you don't eat very much. You use that time to pray. Use that time to pray for others that are maybe sick. It's a time for you to pray for your children, and it's a time to seclude yourself. You have all the pressures of your life during your work time, and you have those responsibilities. A woman on her menstrual cycle usually doesn't cook for her family, and she doesn't do household labors around the home. She has a time that she has for herself to grow spiritually and to take care of herself physically. Also during that time, she's almost like, if I could think of something that's iridescent and something that's just pulsing and beautiful and wonderful. All this stuff is happening inside of her. She also is drawing powers into her. And for that reason, if she was to go around men during that time and touch them, his powers may just completely leave him, because that woman is iridescent and moving and drawing powers. She might take the powers that he has built up through his fasting or through the sweat lodge experience or through his dreams. That powers could leave him and it would go to recharge her. And all that is happening. When we were talking about the spirits inside of a small plant, inside of the pipe, inside of each of the medicines, we talk to those spirits when we use them, when we pick that tobacco for the first time. We ask for all the spiritual essence of that tobacco to help us, not just the physical form, but the spiritual form. And in doing that, we feel like we have the balance of the physical and the spiritual. If a woman on her menstrual cycle were to touch that tobacco, that spiritual essence would leave that tobacco, and it would go inside of her. And then you'd be left with a tobacco plant, but you wouldn't be left with that spiritual essence. And because a woman's power is so strong, if she's on her moon time, she might leave some of her negative toxins that she's throwing off on that tobacco. And if a person is following a spiritual way of life, and they're dealing with all these things of their mind, all these things of substance abuse or the crimes that they've committed, they're dealing with so much at this time that we don't want to interfere with that healing. So when it talks about in this Article 4 is that out of respect for those spiritual items, for the things that are in your tobacco bag, that are in with your pipe, out of respect for those, if we had a woman search those items, and she might say, well, I'm equal to you, I can search items the same as you can, and all the equal rights and that are normally out in that system. Okay, we agree that that should happen, but for the spiritual items and for protection of these spiritual items, we prefer that men search these things. We prefer that men, if they have to be searched, and you go through it and all that, to make sure that a man searches that. If that is not possible, that a man cannot search that. If you cannot find a man in your whole prison system that can search that bag, and a woman has to do it, whoever is bringing in those sacred items has the option of just going home. I can't allow a woman to touch these items. I'll come another time when it's more convenient for a male person to be there to search them.
Sacred spot or a power spot? Is there a certain place that the sweat lodge?
The question was, is this sweat lodge built on a sacred spot? We consider that all places on earth to be sacred. And it's like how you put your tobacco down when you begin to build that lodge. You put your tobacco down at that spot, and you clean it, and you put your good feelings in that spot, and that makes that spot ready for whatever you put your tobacco down for.
You mentioned that substance abuse was maybe one of the things that a person in a sweat ceremony might be dealing with as, I assume, a spiritual problem. One of the other ways it can be looked at. Do you find, is there the usage of these spiritual exercises for recovery? Are they used as an additional help to recover from an addictive behavior or habit?
The question was, is the sweat lodge used for addictive behavior such as substance abuse? That is one of the things that the sweat lodge is a place to purify yourself, to purify your body, and to bring whatever problems that you have into that sweat lodge so that those spiritual helpers in that lodge that come can help take care of their problems. For someone that's in recovery from substance abuse, there's other ways that some of the list of items are in your list, the different herbs and things that you use. You might use a certain herb to use for the problem of substance abuse, of alcohol. You might use a plant that was specially for that purpose, that a medicine person saw that would help with that problem. You would bring other problems to that lodge, which would be problems of the mind, physical problems. You might be having a physical problem such as arthritis or a bad back, or you might have any number of problems that you would bring to that lodge.
Are you aware of individuals who have found continued sobriety as a result of their spiritual practice then?
One thing that I can't speak for everyone, but I would say yes to that. One thing that I've taken the state test for substance abuse leaders, and we find that one thing that's necessary in recovery is holding on to a spirituality, holding on to that power greater than yourself. Many Native American people have a very difficult time dealing with the Christian spirituality. They feel more comfortable with the Native American spirituality. And the thing is that if you believe in that stronger power, and you pray and you get that help that you need, that's what's really important with your recovery, is just recognizing that greater power, and then asking for those prayers to come to help.
And I am a custody officer working at the Chippewa Temporary Correctional Facility. There are some Indians who, I guess what we're going to be doing is, if they contact the chaplains, then they'll try to contact maybe a volunteer from the outside, and I believe that's where the Commission of Indian Affairs is going to come in. Going back to the Commission on Indian Affairs, the Commission of Indian Affairs will not be able to find out from a tribe whether a person is a pipe carrier or if that person is able to run a sweat lodge. All that the Commission will be able to do is to verify that that person is a tribal member. Because I know right now if you was to contact the Commission on Indian Affairs and have them ask my tribe if I was a pipe carrier or if I was able to run a particular ceremony, that tribe, through their executive councils, would not be able to furnish that information to you. So all that we'll be able to do is to confirm to you that that person would be a member of a tribe. The religion, our Indian religion, for myself, I'm a firm follower. I truly believe in my religion. I've been following it now for about 15, 20 years, and I'm probably learning more and more each day from it. First of all, as far as our beliefs go, most Indian people will believe that all things on this earth has a spirit, that our Creator has given each thing a spirit. And that's where our Indian people have respect for all different life forms. We also believe that there is only one God or one Creator. And some of the different things that you might come into is, previously you might have heard about talking about the 4 different directions. Most of the tribes will believe that in each of the directions that our Creator had placed a main helper. So, we refer to them as grandfathers and say they've been there since the beginning of time. So when usually there's a ceremony, we talk about our 4 directions. We're talking about a spirit helper in a particular direction that our Creator put there. And we also believe, when it comes to the tobacco, that tobacco is going to be very important to Indian people who follow the religion. We believe that tobacco was given to us by the Creator as a means to pray with. And the tobacco itself has a spirit. And the Creator had instructed that tobacco to, when we pray with them, to deliver that message to them. So that's why we use the tobacco. And so when that tobacco is given, it's kind of like a commitment. We use that tobacco, we'll give that to somebody to maybe run a ceremony, to have a pipe ceremony, or in, I guess in my instance, tobacco was given to me about 3 years ago. So I would bring the pipe that I carry into KCF. And for a spiritual person who follows, might be a pipe carrier, the tobacco commits him. He will then have to bring his pipe in and use that to pray for with different. Another thing I wanted to talk about is some of the ceremonies. The sweat lodge and the pipe ceremonies, not all of them will be the same. Myself, I had a chance to go down to Milan Federal Prison, and I looked at the layout on their sweat lodge and how it was built, and for me, that was the first time that I've ever seen a sweat lodge built so big. Because how I learned it myself, and it will be the most tribes here in Michigan, will be a smaller type of lodge. And I think that we're going to try to get pictures of that sweat lodge down there for you of Milan. And it's probably taller than what I am right now, and quite big. But the lodges that I go into and what I've been taught to is they're more of a smaller, compact nature to try to hold the heat in. And the fire would also be a smaller. We'll talk about that later, I guess, when we start talking more about the sweat lodges. And I guess that kind of brings up to the point that all the ceremonies will not be run the same. The Sioux, they'll have like the bigger lodges, or they might have the door facing to the west. Here in Michigan, where the Ojibwe's and Potowatomis, Odawas, most times we'll find where the door for the sweat lodge will be facing to the east. And a pipe ceremony might not be run the same. And even the ceremony itself inside the sweat lodge, it's not always run the same. Okay, I've talked earlier about we believe that all life has a different spirit to it. And when for us Indian people, I guess we believe that we have different helpers, spirit helpers that walk with us. And so we'll use that when we go into the sweat lodge. We'll invite the different spirit helpers and to help purify us. While we're in the lodge, we'll also invite the different spirits in there. And that's where it's going to go back to where most people will have respect for that sweat lodge, is because we're inviting the different spirits inside the lodge so that we can pray to our Creator and help purify ourselves. Different types of ceremonies. I've had an inmate come up to me when I was volunteering at KCF and asked about the possibility of getting a medicine man to come in to maybe work on him. I never did get with the chaplain at the facility about that, but I told him, well, maybe that is a possibility. We'd have to try to get clearance or something. And we have, I guess we look at him as a highly respected spiritual leader, because we believe that some people are gifted to maybe heal a person. And, if somebody could maybe have a sickness within him, that person would then come in, and he might have different rattles with him, or shakers and drums and songs that he would sing and try to heal that person. Now, a lot of Indian people who follow this way, they truly believe that. And it's a pretty powerful ceremony. And I guess what I wanted to say is, that would be part of the beliefs. That medicine man might be a pipe carrier or carry different medicines with him that he might use, different herbs. And we have also, within the Ojibwes, we have different, we have what we call a shaker lodge, where a man would go inside of a lodge and people can ask him questions, and I guess he kind of finds out what, the question for him, or he could even find out a cure for a sickness. But as far as maybe coming into our prison system, I really don't foresee that. And I guess just kind of reiterating everything that was kind of said so far, so if there's any questions at this time. Yes, sir.
If the Office of Indian Affairs is not going to be able to verify a person's credentials, how do we do that, Ms. Chaplain?
The question was if the Commission of Indian Affairs will not be able to verify a person's credentials. As far as the spirituality part goes, the question was how are they going to do that? I can't really say how you're going to do that. All you'll be able to do is find out whether that person is a member of a tribe. And maybe it's possible that somebody in the tribe will know that person. Like myself, if somebody was in our area and somebody was to contact me, I'd go in and volunteer at KCF. If somebody was to ask me about somebody, or if I knew of somebody who wanted to volunteer, I would probably write them a letter of reference. It's in, yes, I've known this person for such and such time, and he follows this way and carries a pipe, and I guess we're just going to have to look within the area they're from. So,
Andy, one of the questions I have in regards to that is what your opinion would be, or how we're going to approach it as far as a prisoner led. And so, the situation we got the temporary there was a little bit, that was a prisoner run pipe ceremony. And then after he left, we didn't want to restart that program under that issue. What do you think about that?
The question was, what do I think about as far as prisoner-led run ceremonies in the absence of a volunteer? Is what I guess what we're going to have to do really is pretty much follow what the state policies is. If the state policies say that a prisoner can run that particular ceremony, and then that's the way it's going to have to be. But if in your area you might get a kite from a prisoner to you asking for Native American religion to come into the facility, that request is first going to come to you as a chaplain. So I would probably suggest, if there was, to find out how many different Indian people are requesting it first, and then try to locate a volunteer within the area. Maybe you could tell the prisoner that you're in the process then of trying to contact a volunteer in the area. And
would you call a tribal center to find out about locating volunteers? How would you go about that?
The question was, would we call a tribal center to contact a volunteer? That is a possibility. Of a tribal center would possibly know of a pipe carrier or someone who can run a ceremony. I would probably do that first. And if the particular tribal center or doesn't know of any volunteers, then I really don't know. Can anybody else answer that question?
Volunteers. I think by us being here today that there's going to be more interest stirred as far as a volunteer coming forward.
Steve, can you stand up to the microphone and say the problem is you get
Again, my name is Dwight Teeple. The question on prisoner-led ceremonies within the prison system, and I'm not going to quote state policy or anything else. I'm just going to give my opinion on that particular issue, and you will have to follow state policy as to regards of that. I myself am a pipe carrier. If I end up in the system as a prisoner, I would not expect to carry that over into the prison system. If I were a chaplain, I would not expect to carry my chaplaincy over into the prison system to run and lead other prisoners. There is enough charisma without the use of what we consider our power objects are sacred in the organization of any kind of group within a prison system. It's, in my opinion, is not needed at all. And matter of fact, I don't think that, and a lot of prisoners would probably disagree with me, and probably a lot of other of my people would disagree with me, but that's simply not a place for that kind of thing. If they were following the ways of the Creator, 9 times out of 10, they wouldn't have ended up in the institution, in my opinion. Yes?
As a pipe carrier, if you became incarcerated, would you hold your pipe once incarcerated? Are you following? Are you saying you would leave?
I would expect to have folks come in from the outside to help lead.
Okay.
I would not expect to be leading from the inside. The other thing, in regards to addresses of tribes, we can provide that information from the Commission of Indian Affairs or from the tribes themselves. I've got information that I can provide to the central office that can be disseminated. Of all the addresses of all the tribes that had been mentioned earlier today, not only those tribes, but the state-recognized tribes and the urban Indian organizations that would have knowledge of the local Indian community. I have to agree, yeah. They would not tell you, who a pipe carrier is or whatnot, but they would be able to tell you whether a person is recognized in the community as an Indian person.
You bring up another question when you talk about a person who has certain privileges, not necessarily carrying them on in the institution. What is the Indian understanding about redemption once a person is in the system? They've committed, well, whether they're in or out, once they've committed some crime, how do the Indians come to redemption?
Personally, if for example, I myself, if I commit a crime, I'm willing to pay the price. That's the way it is. In other words, I'm not going to go against anything that I believe. The things that I would do is part of what I believe. And if it means going to prison, that's what I will do.
I'd like to come back to the question of credentials. Well, let me just say this, and I hope this is not offensive to you, but let's say as a white man, my tradition of clergy means we have specified training and education and ecclesiastical endorsement and recognition, et cetera, from the judicatory or originating body from which we come. And so there's a public recognition and manifestation in our background to say that this person is the spiritual leader, the clergy, if you will, in our tradition, and can then perform the sacraments of the various things in our religion and tradition, and has that recognition and distinction. And you're saying, I'm not sure how that's done in your tradition, but you're saying that even if you were to contact the tribe, they wouldn't necessarily be able to tell, they should be able to tell you, it seems to me, who this person is in your midst, who's looked upon as, what, the spiritual leader, the medicine man, or the person who can, what is the term, and what are the credentials, and how do you go about identifying this person?
There are several terms within in our Indian communities that identify people as either spiritual leaders, medicine people, medicine men, medicine women. However, those folks do not call themselves that. Myself, I don't even, if I wasn't standing here before you, I wouldn't have mentioned that I was even a pipe carrier. And I wouldn't have mentioned to you that I was a spiritual leader or a medicine man. I don't claim to be those things. However, there are people in my community, throughout the state of Michigan, throughout Ontario, throughout Wisconsin, Upper Great Lakes region, that consider me a spiritual leader. I do not claim that title.
What could the state do, for instance, in the prison system? If they needed, say there are 5 or 6 prisoners in a certain locale, and they needed to find someone to help facilitate the services from the outside that are necessary to promulgate your beliefs and practices. How could they do this? What would you recommend?
In our community, as Andrew had stated, you can contact the tribal governments, and as I stated, I will furnish that list of all the contact numbers for all of the tribes, all the state tribes, the federal tribes, as well as the Indian communities, urban Indian communities, to the department. Those folks at those centers generally have an idea of who in the community follows the traditional way. Not all the time, and not all the people in that community. The secretary may know, the secretary may not know. So you may have to go all the way up to your tribal chairman or the executive director of the organization to find out, just discussion with them who might be an individual in that community to help assist in coming into a system.
I guess just to follow up, and maybe we're pressing a little bit in order to protect the men who want to follow the Indian way from someone coming in pretending to be a spiritual leader but is not. It's just a game. How can we protect the young men who are of the Native American tradition, who want to practice their way? How can we protect them from somebody pulling a shenanigans and saying, oh yeah, I'm a medicine man, I'm a pipe carrier, but you're saying, but nobody's going to tell me whether he is or not. So we could get all kinds of people in there, conceivably, theoretically, playing a lot of games, and somehow, as a chaplain, I can't really identify that that person is the real McCoy, or a genuine spiritual leader in your way. And I guess I'm pressing you for, I can't be satisfied with that answer. How can I protect you people?
I can't summarize the question other than how do we find out who is actually a spiritual leader to come into a correctional institution. Yes.
Is there someone that can write a letter from the tribe for you saying, in fact, you are a pipe carrier, and that person is recognized in the tribe as knowing?
Let me finish out the question first here that was first initially asked. If the commission and if the communities themselves do not know who the individual is, I myself, Mr. Leblanc, Mr. Winchester, other folks within the Indian communities would be more than happy to research the background of any individual for you. There's plenty more than just us out there that are, yes.
Thank you.
I was kind of want to bring that up anyways, because like up in where I live in the UP, we get together and have ceremonies, usually 2 times a year, maybe 3, 4 times a year. We have our different feasts, and a lot of times a lot of people will get together and bring their pipes there. So we pretty much know, in Michigan only, I can only say, who would, possibly be a pipe carrier or who runs lodges. And downstate here, I'm aware of B and her husband, and they've also know a lot of other people who follow this way. So that would be the best route. But as far as verifying what tribe, if a person comes from out of state, I really can't say how we could find out. It's possibly that somebody might know somebody else. Yes, sir.
Is it safe to say that if somebody came and was bragging about their credentials that way, a good rule of thumb is they're probably not?
That's a good possibility.
And if it was, you'd probably know about it.
Now, I might have missed this, but how do you become a pipe carrier?
For myself, it was shown like in a vision that I had. I have also fasted for 4 days and 4 nights. Myself, a vision was shown to me of the pipe, and there's also other people that will have visions that show them that they are to make a pipe for somebody and present that pipe to somebody. So there's ways coming that way where the spirits try to get that message across of who will be a pipe carrier. Not everybody is a pipe carrier. Any Indian just can't go who follows a spiritual way and pick up a pipe and pray with that and use it that way, because we believe that pipe has a spirit, and then that pipe picks out an individual to take care of it.
So it's possible for someone who's incarcerated to become a pipe carrier or medicine man?
If that person was to have maybe a vision for that, then that would be the case.
And they would tell the chaplain that I've had a vision, and now I am a pipe carrier. I mean, I'll return the department up there. Is that possible?
That's possible for that circumstance to happen. But if in fact that person, we believe that if in fact that person didn't have that vision, I guess that circumstance would take care of itself. Maybe the pipe would break or something.
The pipe itself, this is, like I say, you have a vision and to be a pipe here. This is something you go out and make yourself? Or is it something you go buy someplace?
No, most pipe carriers, what we have is it's a red stone pipe. We call it bloodstone. And it comes from a clay, and it's a very sacred stone to us. And it'll be carved out of that stone. You will find some black stone, maybe a soapstone also that pipe carriers carry. And a lot of cases it's you carve it yourself, or maybe somebody will carve it for you. Yes, ma'am.
Sweat lodge that's done at KCF, if you do not participate as a volunteer, can the prisoners go in there and do the sweat lodge by themselves, or are you mandated that you're the supervision and which is a level 2?
To this point, we haven't had sweat lodges at KCF. We've just had the pipe ceremonies.
Just the pipe ceremonies.
Let me answer one more thing about the sweat lodge, particularly at KCF. The group that comes, since I volunteer there, it ranges all the way from 10 to 12 people, and lately it's kind of dropped back. There's about 5 or 6 different inmates come in to the services, and I kind of keep them abreast of what's been happening as far as the setting up of this training. And in particular, we talked about the pipes going in to for an inmate to have a pipe. And without giving them my opinion or anything like that, they expressed their opinion that other inmates should not be able to carry pipes. Or other inmates, they did not want to, at KCF, to be a pipe carrier, and they did not want to run a sweat lodge. And they felt that, and I outright asked them why, and they felt that if a person is going to be a pipe carrier in there, another inmate might come up and say, "Who do you think you are to be carrying a pipe carrier? You're an inmate just like I am. Well, who do you think you are for running this sweat lodge? You're another inmate, and it could cause dissension." And I said, "We don't want that, not here." So, it's a pretty good group there. I believe they're quite sincere at inmates there.
With regard to the fast, is it a total fast for 4 or 5 days, or is it a fast that's broken after sundown or before sunup? How does that operate?
For us in Michigan, it's a total fast. We try to go out alone by yourself, and you usually have a fire, because with fire, we use to burn our tobacco with, and we'll take tobacco with us, and that's about it. There's no food, no water, nothing for 4 days.
Do the prisoners at KCF participate in fast?
Some have talked about it, about possibly giving up maybe a day or two, for a particular reason. They might have a sick family member. But as far as a fast, as far as a vision quest, no, they have not and do not really want to do that there. For myself, in our tribe, we try to go up to a higher area, away from any civilization, so you can be by yourself. Yes, sir.
From what I gather, am I correct in assuming that there's not one man who is a pipe carrier, sweat lodge, runs a sweat lodge, medicine man, spiritual leader, such as a chaplain? I can do anything within my realm within my belief system.
The question was, is a one man can be a pipe carrier, run sweat lodges, or be a medicine man? I guess for us, and for my belief is, myself, I'm a pipe carrier, and I also run the sweat lodges. And as far as healing people go, not everybody would have that, particular gift. We believe that everything is a gift given to us by our Creator. An example would be maybe Steve could possibly be a healer of some sort, and he might not might not have a pipe. But I guess the answer is, there is no one thing that covers everything. You might be just a pipe carrier, not run lodges, or you might do them all. Most cases, a medicine man would have a pipe and run lodges. Yes, sir.
Yeah. I'm realizing here that, as trained European thinkers, we got all these rules and laws and procedures and everything, and your thought system is so different in that you don't have all these proofs. But how do you document or prove, if you have to, and I guess you don't, that you had this vision? Do people just accept you coming back and claiming that I was given this vision, and this is now my gift to perform and give to the community that wants the service that I have now been given?
I guess anybody else, the question was, how do you prove that somebody is a pipe carrier and who has been given a vision or anything like that? And my answer would be, there's really no proof. You have to have a feeling of belief. Myself, if somebody was, like I said, I truly believe in my spirituality way, and if somebody was to come up and lie to me, and I guess I would feel it. And I think you'll find it the same with a lot of other Indian people. They'll get that feeling on a person, whether he's a good person or a bad person. This is some of our beliefs, and a lot of us truly believe that, and we follow this way. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have any type of jewelry or emblems that are religiously significant?
The question was, do we have any type of jewelry or emblems that is religiously significant? I believe that you will find that almost anything really to an Indian person who follows this way will have a religious significance. It's going to go back to what I've said before, is that we believe that everything that our Creator made here, from grass to a piece of wood, all has a spirit. And the religious significance would come to where we respect the spirit of a particular object. Yes, Yes, ma'am.
I was told by my ADW they asked this question in his absence, and it deals with that. The gentlemen at ATF wear their little medicine bags around their neck. You being a corrections officer, you probably address this also. Do you allow them into the visiting room with those objects around their neck, as other religions are allowed to take their religious symbols in the visiting rooms with them?
The question was, as far as medicine bags, or people, or what they might wear around their necks, taking them into a visiting room. I believe that as far as work in custody goes, and being a volunteer at KCF, I would tell them that if they wear something that they can be and will be shaken down at any time. And as far as taking something like that into a visiting room and then leaving back with it again, as a custody officer, I would shake it down. Because, you know, if it went in and it's going to go back, it would be shaken down again.
Has the department developed a policy on that? It's an issue where we have.
I think that the thing that we have to keep in mind is that...
Excuse me, Anita, I need you to go into the microphone.
I was trying to avoid this microphone. Thought my voice was loud enough, Deputy Collins. I think the thing that is important that we have to remember about this is that the Native American Indian religion is a little different in that it's an ethnicity, it's a heritage, it's a culture, it's also a religion. And what we are going to do is try to accommodate as many things as we can in all of this. What their needs are, what the bureaucracy's needs are, the Department of Corrections needs are, all that sort of thing. So just to summarize how we're going to proceed with this is you have to look at is how do we, what do we afford to the other religions? You know, do we allow X, Y, and Z? If the answer to that is yes, then that is what we will do, okay? Also, with the search requirements that we have, do we search X, Y, and Z? Yes, it's going to be the same, okay? Yes?
But we're dealing now with female staff, where we had one time said the boards we couldn't pat the boards down to female staff. We're getting back into that. Now, do they realize if they come up with their medicine bag that a female staff could be shaking it down? Now, we're not talking about volunteers coming in, we're talking about the prisoner in there. Now, are we coming up with issues of that, where we've told the other religions, no, there will be a female in that service, and, you know, we might be going back into that. I think we're opening a can of worms.
It's a can of worms, and then it's all brand new. Quite honestly, the way I got on this panel is by being a skeptic and saying that, geez, I don't know how we're going to do this. I can imagine some of the wardens that I worked for and their reaction to sweat lodges. So yeah, I understand fully what you're saying, but it is to the point where we can't object to it. We have to proceed because of the issue of rights and freedom to practice religion.
Where's the female officer coming in?
The female officer is going to do her job. If the prisoner objects to that, then there are consequences. You either don't have it or you give it up. You know what I'm saying? So if the person is going to come through the gates, and the person is a pipe carrier, and you have a female working at the gate, it depends on how we're going to proceed with this. If we say, then the men should be the ones to shake it down, I don't really see that we're ostracizing that woman in any way. Okay? We would be ostracizing if we said, hi, are you having your menstrual cycle right now? That is entirely inappropriate. But if we kind of usurp all of that and just have the man do the shakedown, I don't really see that that is a problem. If there's not a male officer available for that, then obviously the female is going to have to shake that object down. If that is objectionable to the pipe carrier, then they will have to leave, or simply put the item in the locker and then go in.
How about the medicine bag on the prisoner?
The prisoner is going to have to submit to search.
I seem to remember last year there was a handout some percentage of the workers that discussed the religion we're not talking about, when they made mention of the medicine bags when they were searched. should be searched, but the prisoner should be the one handling the objects or reporting his own hand? Is that?
I don't have any knowledge of that. You're probably right, Fred, but I'm kind of new to this sort of thing. Anybody else? Bob?
Maybe I'd just like to maybe get the feelings from the Native American Indians on the panel. Again, following up on her question about women searching the medicine bag. Your own feelings on it. I know what our policy is. I understand that. I just like to hear it.
I guess what I'm going to say is going back to what Mr. Teeple said, that they're inside. They put themselves there, and it's like I told our volunteer group that there's a possibility. They asked me about carrying them in the bags, maybe about carrying a little of sage inside of it or little stones. I said, if you're going to wear them, you can expect them to be shaken down. You can't have something and say you're not going to be shaken down. And they accepted that. They were happy to be able to do that. And they said, well, how about the possibility of us doing the dumping it out? And I says, I don't know. That's going to be up to that particular officer. He might want to say, let me see what you have there. And I says, if you're going to hassle them, you're going to, I guess, suffer the consequences.
But as I understand the religious significance of the medicine bags and what the young lady talked about, isn't that kind of going against about the woman's power?
Yes, but I told them, if you're going to wear something and carry something, it can be shaken down. You're taking a chance of having it ruined. They agreed.
Follow-up question, is it necessary for a Native American Indian to wear a medicine bag into a visiting room in the first place?
Necessary? No, it wouldn't be. As we wear different objects with us to have, I guess, different spirit helpers with us or for protection. But as far as bringing it into a visiting room for a couple hours, it probably wouldn't be. If they take it up on her, it can be searched, or maybe even told them to send back to your unit if you don't want it touched. Yes, sir.
Are you aware of any waiver from the permanent correctional cases? Right now, the person who's coming as a religious volunteer or a religious visitor that provide documentation to prove they're affiliated with something. Right now, with this religion, you're not. Does something come down from permanent correctional waiving that requirement? Then you might answer that better.
I didn't understand the question.
Okay, right now, if a person wants to come in on a religious visit, he or she has to provide something indicating that they are endorsed by a religion. Right now, I'm hearing they don't provide this. There's something coming down from Lansing indicating that it's a waiver of this requirement.
I think it's apples and oranges, Tony, because, as mentioned earlier, most other religions have some kind of ecclesiastical endorsement, and this is a little bit different in that there is no certificate, licensure, etc. So what we will have to do is get somewhat of a directory from the commission and as many sources as we can to verify those people that we're going to allow into those institutions. And that will be as best we can do. We, won't have, a piece of paper or a card or.
We're going to still work within the policy and try to have either the Michigan Commission on Indian Affairs or the local tribe put something in writing or whatever to say that this person is a part of their group or that they're recognized. Because it's still important to follow policy that has not been changed, and I'm not at this point going to request a waiver.
My name is Steve Winchester again. Wabanosa is my Indian name.
Could you speak a little louder, please?
My Indian name is Wabanosa. It means walk in the dawn. I just received that name back in November '91. So I just wanted to explain that when a person takes on the spirituality or walks the red road, they're taking on a lot upon themselves. And that's walking a straight line, the thin and narrow, trying to maintain that balance to find out who you are. I wasn't always exposed to the Native American religion as far as Indian people go. I wasn't fully involved in it until 1980. So my mother is non-Indian, my father was full-blood Potowatomi. So I was raised in mainly the non-Indian community. But something was always missing and lacking that I felt within myself. So certain things started happening to me that I could not explain, and it was just a course of action that I became involved in the spirituality of this. Basically, we're here today because of the American Indian Religious Freedom Act of 1978. It's been a short 12, 14 years since this act was brought out by Congress that we're able to practice our ceremonies and conduct our religious practices. Before, it was illegal for us to possess eagle feathers, have the medicine bundles, conduct sweat lodges, and be generally accepted within the public. We could be arrested for it and prosecuted. But through this act, it has opened it up for us to do this now. And a lot of the younger generation have, taken this on and try to. The younger people in that generation are, taking on and seeking the teachings from the elders. These teachings and cultures were never lost. They were always there, but the bundles, the teachings had to be kept underground, to speak. Our grandfathers passed it on to them secretly because they would have been prosecuted if they were found out. And the certain bundles or the items, the sacred objects, would be taken away from them. And so it's very honorable to be here today to try to make some cultural awareness to the people. We're here because the religious freedom also extends to the prisoners in the system. And we're here to show that we do honor these ways, and I was here mainly for exploitation, that does not happen. I want to talk a little bit about being a pipe carrier or a caretaker of a bundle. Now, I take care of a pipe bundle, as Bucko was talking earlier, and Andrew, that there's different types of pipes, red stone, black stone, soapstone. The one I take care of is a black stone pipe. Now this pipe is a grandfather, as we indicate, because it is very old. It's an ancient pipe. It was used in the treaty periods of 1833 and prior to that. Now this was within my family way back then, during the late 1700s, early 1800s. My grandfather took care of it, and he lived in Kansas. He was one of the Potowatomis that went down there during the removal time, but came back to Michigan. Through his death, it came into possession of my father, and my father held on to it for many years. And he never showed it to our children, or my brothers or sisters or any other family members. He just held on to it. And then he went to Michigan State University as a coordinator for Indian Affairs, and he had it placed in the museum now, so it would be preserved. And that was back in 1969. When my father passed away in '73, it remained there until 1981, when the family went back up to the museum and returned it. So it was a family decision that I would be the caretaker for that pipe. And I just kept wondering about, am I doing the honorable thing and taking care of this pipe? So I went searching to all the elders in the community, to different powwows that were throughout the state, trying to learn more about the pipe. And I went to several different spiritual leaders, medicine men, pipe carriers, and they basically all told me the same thing. So that's when I started learning on this red road. And to the point now where people were coming to me with tobacco, requesting that I would conduct a ceremony for them or run a sweat lodge. And I was taking them back because I didn't consider myself a person that could do that. But like when Andrew said, when they offer you tobacco, you have to take that under consideration and do your duty. So I have been involved in taking care of that pipe. I don't consider it mine. It's a Thunder Clan pipe, and it belongs to the people. That is a people's pipe. Now, there are different types of pipes: warrior pipes, clan bundle pipes. The women have their pipes for their own ceremonies. And so that's the basics about the pipe. I'll answer any questions on that. But basically, when you conduct a pipe ceremony, Bucko and Bee went to go get some of the items, as Anita mentioned, what we use to purify or smoke down the area: the sweetgrass, the sage, and cedar. That is usually done prior to the ceremony to pure everyone's thoughts, clean everything out of the atmosphere. Some people do conduct the ceremony differently. Now, the pipe carrier may have his own tobacco and pass that around to the individuals that are going to participate. Ask the participants to hold the tobacco in their left hand, which is the closest to your heart, and then think good thoughts or prayers that you need help out with. And then the pipe carrier will have an assistant and go around and pick that tobacco back up, and then place that tobacco in the pipe, and then offer it to the 6 directions as Bucko was talking about. Offer it to the east, the south, the west, the north, the Earth Mother, and the Creator above. And some people offer one more direction as all the universal forces, making it a 7th direction. But not all pipe carriers do that. Through these ceremonies, when the people are offering the tobacco, they're asking for help in their prayers, using the pipe carrier as sort of like a middleman or a middle person to help them with their prayers or problems or concerns. And then afterwards, depends on the ceremony, if it's in a longhouse or a talking circle, an eagle feather will be passed around the group. And then they will have their turn to stand up and talk what they feel, what problems they may have, what teachings they are seeking. And the pipe ceremony is conducted in that fashion in a longhouse. Pipe ceremonies are also used in the sweat lodge, the combination of the two. And then some people will not have a pipe ceremony in the sweat lodge. It depends on the conductor and what they're doing, what the sweat lodge is for. That shows a list here on that memo from Dan Bolden about the pipe items, the medicine bag contents. Some of those items are going to be brought out so you can view them right now. Another aspect that I was asked to touch on was about the length of hair for the male Indian prisoners. Now, it's tradition that, people wear their hair long. In some states, they do not allow that. They're having problems with that within their correctional facilities. The federal system is allowing that. The state of Michigan's policy in general did not disallow long hair as long as it's neat and clean. But other states are disallowing that. Whenever we have to talk about these kind of situations, whatever the state is doing on this level about the Native American religion will have an effect on the national level. So there is an amendment out now to this American Indian Religious Freedom Act to help protect some of the rights and the rituals. And that bill will be introduced in 1993. And that's going to try to help identify who Native American people are within the prison system. But I won't get into that right now. That can be one of the questions. I'll take any questions at this time.
The medicine bag, would that go on the property list? How would that be identified as one person?
Okay, just a moment, please. No problem. Okay, this is my personal medicine bag that I carry. I don't hang it around my neck or on my side. It's own personal preference. And on the inside, in the prison system, it would only mainly have cedar or tobacco in here, depending on what the institution's going to allow as far as access to the medicines. They are allowed to have them for the ceremonies, but as far as on their personal possession, I don't think that's been made clear yet. But as far as being on the property card, I really don't know what 5301, the prisoner property control policy, is going to address that, or if that's addressed in the religious policy directive. And this is one of the tobacco ties that they talk about on the list. It's just colored cloth, and there's only tobacco inside here. And this is used as an offering, as one of the sacraments of our medicines. Any other questions?
You said you just got your Indian name years ago. When does that happen in most cases, and who gives you that name?
Okay, I requested, or, I gifted a medicine man with some tobacco and asked him to consider naming me. And that takes a lot of time and effort on their part to fast. They have to fast also to go for a name.
And do you also fast?
Yeah, I fast and pray, and you request to have sponsors. Now, within my area, the Potowatomi down in southern Michigan, Indiana borderline there, I asked for 4 sponsors. They were all male, and they take it upon themselves, too, to do some praying and fasting. And then the person that you requested to have the naming ceremony will contact you and let you know. And then you would have an actual naming ceremony with people invited, have a feast afterwards, and then a giveaway to the participants. And usually the name would represent what clan you're from, but not always.
Steve, and maybe Andrew and Chaplain Moore, Kinross there, maybe would be better. As far as Simas, we have in some of the other religions, they take different names. Have you seen that to be the case? You've been doing this, you say, for 3 years with the budget ceremonies and the other ceremonies. Have you seen people taking and making requests for name changes on Simas and things like that? Or is that not?
The question was, have, in my experience, seen any requests for name changes through Simas? To this point, no, I haven't had any requests for name changes. Usually, like an Indian name, my name is Nimkiningwa Nodin. I myself, I consider that my first name, but for legal purposes, and which most other people also follow, they will all use their English name. Like I was born with Andrew Leblanc, so I use that name, any type of business I have. But, if I go to ceremonies or pipe ceremonies, the first thing I do is identify myself by my Indian name. Because I view that as spiritually that's who I am.
So this is basically just for purposes being used inside the Indian community, not necessarily for legal purposes or whatever.
No, it's not usually for legal purposes, although there are a lot of families these days that are naming their children an Indian name legally when they're born. They will, before the child is born, pray for a name, and then a name could come, and then that's what they name that child right from the start now. So probably within the next 15, 20 years, you will see a lot of Indian names coming up rather than having an English name. Okay, I guess I'll probably start right now on into the sweat lodges. Did everybody get a chance to view them pictures that have gone around? Well, the ones pictures that are going around is pictures of the lodge that is set up down at Milan. And like I said before, I was kind of surprised at the size of it. Because the ones that I've grown up with here and have been taught here in Michigan are a lot smaller. But, you know, I haven't been around the country and probably viewed a lot of other lodges at different other tribes. I've been told that there's some lodges where you can stand up in and walk around, and the lodges that we build here in Michigan are usually smaller in nature, so where you have to pretty much crawl inside, and then there's a sitting room there. We use the saplings when we start constructing the lodges. They're probably about 12, maybe 10 to 12 feet tall, and we try to get the saplings to where they're bendable. And a while back it was kind of questionable. Well, you're going to have a 15-foot sapling inside there. You know, isn't that kind of dangerous for prisoners maybe to try to get over the fence? But the type of sapling that we use would not be strong enough to support the weight of a human. It would definitely bend and break. So what we do is, in that handout you have, there's in the back page, there's kind of a diagram of a sweat lodge. And all these lodges are going to vary in different sizes. It could be, depending on who's going to be running the lodges, on what size it's going to be. And what we usually do is we'll take a small stake and pound that into the ground to make the hole, and then for each sapling we will sink that into the ground at an angle. This is for the construction of the lodge. And then we'll bend them over and tie them all together. In the olden days, a lodge used to be a one-time. We'd pass down. They would usually make it out of, in this area here, out of red willow. And after the lodge is over, they'd take the lodge down and not use the willow again, because it was looked at as it's a healing process of when you go in the lodge, and a lot of negativity comes out of a person. So they wouldn't use that spot or the willow again. But nowadays, being the way our forest is happening, we try to use a sapling that can be used over and over and over again. So a lot of times we'll put it up and it'll stay good for about 2 years until maybe the sapling completely dries out and does break, at which time we have to replace it. So we usually use an ash, some type of ash or a maple to construct that. And after the lodge is constructed, like I say, it'll probably be more of a permanent inside of our institutions. It can be up for about maybe depending on the life of the sapling, 2 or 3 years. We use tarps to cover our lodge, and I'm not really sure how we're going to go about getting our tarps. But I know down at Milan, what they have is they have their lodge set up there, and I think when the pictures come around, you'll see that there's a small little shed located nearby, in which they keep the shovel in there, and they keep all the tarps. So once the lodge is over with, they'll take everything off it again, so the lodge will look just like the picture you have there. It'll be just a shell where you can see through it. So for security-wise, you know, nobody would be able to hide in there, so then the tarps would be put away along with everything else. We have usually probably about 6 to 10 feet, maybe it could be farther, a fire pit where we heat the rocks on. We have to, I'm not sure how we're going to handle getting wood inside our facilities to heat the rocks up, or even how we're going to bring the rocks in facilities yet. But up in the area where I'm volunteered, as a volunteer, I did say that I would go out in the beginning and bring the saplings in and bring the stones in, or at least bring them to the sally port part, and then they can be brought over to where the lodge is going to be constructed. And what we do is that we usually we have a fire, and to us even the fire is sacred. We use what we call a flint fire. We don't start the fire with a match or anything like that. we use a flint, and there's a spirit with that rock, so, and we ask that flint give us the fire. And then the rocks are placed inside the fire and heated usually till they're red hot. And depending on how many rocks are put into the lodge, it's going to vary. There could be a possible 6 rocks, or it could be all the way up to, I've seen 28 rocks some people have put into the fire to heat up. In the center of the lodge, there's a pit that we dig, and that's, once the rocks are heated, we bring the rocks inside, and they're placed inside the pit. And I believe on the listing we have a shovel with holes poked in it to carry the rocks in there. Then after the rocks are in there, then the one running the lodge, everybody comes in to the lodge, and the tarps are closed up, and it's pretty much sealed off. And what we do from there is, as I stated earlier about our 4 directions, is we start making what we call medicine offerings. Some places you'll find where the one conducting the sweat lodge will use just pure water, and that gets pretty hot when you do that. It kind of stings you. So usually what we use is what we refer to it as medicine water. But from where I'm from, we use a wild bergamot is the name of the plant that we use. In other places, they might take cedar and boil that up and use that as the medicine water to pour over the rocks. And then we pour the medicine onto the rocks, and the steam comes up, and we use that the medicine water as an offering to each one of the grandfathers in the direction. We'll start off at the east, and we'll invite that spirit to come inside the lodge. It goes right around to the south and the west and the north, inviting them grandfathers in, and also to our Mother Earth and our Creator. Usually at that time, then after all the offerings have been made, we'll open up the lodge again, and not all rocks are brought in right in the beginning. Excuse me. And so, depending on who's running it, they might want, say, 8 rocks in. If you have, say, 20 rocks on the fire, then the second part is when we here in this tribe will bring the rest of the rocks in. And being that in the first part of the lodge, all directions were invited in to hear our prayers and to help us and purify us, the second time we close up is individually, is when we'll go around and take turns, and each individual in the lodge will pray. Earlier, Bucko stated that usually the way our lodges is we don't go in to pray for ourselves. We usually pray for other people or other things. It gets quite hot in there, depending on the number of rocks. So that's why, if people are curious about wanting to go into a lodge, I think they'll probably be discouraged, because the object of our lodge is we go in there and to suffer, for our prayers. We feel as if we have to give up something for our prayers. We use the tobacco as a part of giving, but then the lodge itself is we give up our suffering so that our prayers could be answered. And usually after everyone is done praying and the medicine's all gone, then at that point the lodges would be over. I'll go back to usually when we open up for that second time and bring in the second batch of rocks, is if a pipe carrier is running the lodge, he usually has his pipe there with him. At that time is where they usually would light the pipe up and pass that around, and everybody would pray with the pipe also. As far as running the lodge goes, that could take any place from maybe an hour and a half to 2 hours to heat the rocks. Sometimes it could heat in an hour. Then the lodge itself, the length of how long people will be inside the lodge really depends on how many people goes in and how many people how long each individual prays. If there's only 2 or 3 people that are going inside of a lodge, it wouldn't take as long as whereas if 8 people went in. So it really, the length of the lodge of time it's going to vary from how many people go in. We talked about that, about the sweat lodge as it pertains to count time. what we come up with is, obviously we can't have a lodge which at nighttime because of security reasons. So for institutional, most times they are run at night times on the outside world. But for institutions, our systems here, we would probably have to start that lodge right after maybe afternoon count. And they would have to be finished up before the 4:30 count or whatever time count is in each facility. And so, well, I guess I'll take any questions anybody might have from now. Yes, sir.
I understand you correctly that the materials that that you use to construct the lodge, they are brought in by a volunteer and provided by the Indian community, or do you use tax money, department money to buy these things to build a lodge?
I think the way the Department of Corrections is today is I don't foresee the department buying the material. So it would probably be up to the volunteer in that particular sector where they're at to bring in material. Mm-hmm.
Are there any types of special locks that you use? Just real locks?
Well, we have to be careful when we select the rocks because you can't heat all rocks in a fire. Shale will obviously fall apart once you heat it up and not hold together. And there's what we call sand rocks. They look like they're solid. Well, they are solid until you heat them, but they contain a lot of air inside of them, and they can explode, and rock chips will fly out. Sometimes they'll hold together till you bring them in the pit. Some cold medicine water on it, they'll explode. So usually what we try to do is find a blacker colored stone that's hard. And then some tribes also use lava rocks, and I've heard of them using them over and over and over again because they won't fall apart.
Two questions. One, who oversees the building of the sweat lodge? And secondly, how long does it take to build the sweat lodge?
The question was who oversees the building of the sweat lodge and how long does it take to build a sweat lodge? We really haven't worked that out yet. As far as from the very beginning of going out and getting the stakes or the poles for the lodge, that would be done before it came in, obviously. So once it came in, hopefully we could have some of the prisoners help out in building it. So to probably construct the lodge, and it might take maybe an hour, hour and a half, and then at which time it would be up for, say, a year or 2 years.
There are no institutions currently that are doing sweat lodges. You aren't doing out there. Is anybody doing sweat lodge? Is that a question about
in Michigan?
Clearances? Maybe I could ask the chaplain from Maryland. Right.
In Michigan?
The states.
The question was, is anybody having any sweat lodges currently now in Michigan? The answer to that is no. There is no sweat lodges in any of our systems here in Michigan.
So the second part of that question was a medical. My understanding, it gets extremely hot in the sweat lodges. Is that correct?
Yes.
So we have a lot of older prisoners, and I'm thinking, do the feds do anything in terms of healthcare clearances?
Father Claire Dinger of the Federal Correctional Institution at Milan.
Yeah, the question is, what about health considerations of the men that want to go in and do the sweat lodge? Okay, we have a form that we have at Milan that when they come in and if they want to go to the sweat lodge, they have to fill out the form, and then the form is sent to the hospital in the institution, and the hospital has to clear the man according to his medical records before he's allowed to go out to the sweat lodge. So that's how we take care of it there. Okay. Yes. Did you want to ask me a question? Or?
Either one of you. How long do you normally spend in the sweat lodge? And is anything other than prayer said in that sweat lodge? Can they just talk about, you know, everyday life?
The question was, how long do we spend in the sweat lodge, and do we just talk about prayers, or do we talk about everyday life?
Question, I want to know, in a prison setting, who brings the rocks into the lodge?
And also, part of the question is, who brings the rocks into the lodge? A sweat lodge is built just for praying purposes. So when they go into the lodge, it's just the whole purpose is to pray. And the length of time in there,
Or to smoke, right? You can smoke the pipe too.
the pipe is usually smoked during once a flap is opened up. They will not smoke the pipe while medicine water is being poured over the rocks and the door is closed. 'Cause obviously, there's so much steam in there that the pipe wouldn't keep going. And the length of time will depend on how many people are in there.
What's an average length of time to pray?
I can only speak right now from on the outside. It can be about 2 hours. The chaplain here at Milan probably can give us a better idea of how long they go inside Milan.
Yeah, they usually go in at 10:30. They go out some go out at 8:30 in the morning to start the fire, as Andy said, and get the rocks ready and so forth. Then when they go in the sweat lodge, they're there usually from about 10:30 to 2:30. Now, there may be a group goes in one group goes in and comes out, another group might go in and come out too then. But they're usually there until 2:30, and we usually bring them in about 2:30. So they may sweat, take 3 or 4 sweats, you know, more than one sweat.
Inmates to handle the rocks themselves, bring the rocks into the pit.
The way we do that in Milan is the rocks are brought to the South Sally Port, okay, like Andy said would be done. And then one of the officers on the outside crew loads the rocks one by one into a front-end loader. And then a staff man drives the front-end loader into the sweat lodge area and dumps the rocks, and they put them in a pile there. So the rocks are already brought to the institution. They're already checked out by the officer outside before they're brought in. They're brought in, they're dumped, and then the Native Americans pile them up in neat piles at the sweat lodge. And then they're the ones to take care of them from then on. They put them in the fire and so forth and so on.
They handle the hot rocks.
Yeah, they handle the hot rocks too. In other words, when the rocks are hot in the fire, they pull the rocks out of the fire, and then they carry the rocks over and put them in the pit in the middle of the sweat lodge. Yeah.
Is that what the pallets were for the fire that I saw in the picture?
Yes, those are the pallets. The men break those up and use those as the fuel to heat the rocks. Yes?
Is this a year-round activity even through winter?
Yes, it is. I was wondering if I was going to ask me about that. The question is, do they do this year-round? They do. It's been 5 or 10 degrees below zero out there, and those guys have gone out there and they've done their sweats. And I've really been amazed at that myself.
Don't they have to rejuvenate the rocks to say over a period of 2-3 hours, reheat them or something?
Well, what they do is what Andy says. They'll put maybe 10 or 15 or 20 rocks in the fire. They'll just take a few out at a time, maybe 8 out at a time, see? And then they'll replenish their supply in the pit in the sweat lodge. Yes, sir.
When the door is closed, did you say it was locked?
No, sir, it's closed with a flap. He asked about the closing of the door to the sweat lodge. It's not a door, a wooden door, it's a flap that they let down that seals it off completely. When they open that flap, when they open the flaps, the steam just pours out of that thing. I mean, it's amazing. Yes, sir.
When the men go in, what happens to the clothes that they wear? They're just laying outside? Is somebody guarding them so they don't get ripped off?
The only ones permitted to, the question is, what happens to the clothing of the men that they take off before they go into the sweat lodge? The answer is that only the Native Americans or those that are going to be involved in the sweat lodge are allowed in that area. Nobody else is there at all, so there's no problem about that. And then, of course, it's under the direct supervision of the man in the South Tower.
So they just like a rain, shine, or snow?
Well, they can put there's a locker out there. They could put their clothes in there if they wanted to, but most of them just lay them on top of the locker or lay them on a bench or something like that. Incidentally, now, at Milan, running the sweat lodge is an expense. Andy talked about the rocks. We use field stones. You know, that look like large. What do they call those? pebbles. They look like large pebbles, maybe 3 or 4 inches in diameter. I think you've probably seen them. They use them to build houses with and so forth. But we get them delivered because it takes forever to find those. I mean, if you go out to a farmer's field, you might see a pile of them on the edge of the field. When they plow, they bring them to the edge of the field and set them there. Might be able to get them that way, but don't count on it. We have to buy ours. And they cost $70 a ton. We used to buy them by 3 ton at a time. That's $210 plus $10 hauling fee. So $220 is what we used to pay. And they use a pile of rocks probably every 2 months or 3 months. Pardon me? Well, what happens is that the heat destroys them eventually. They'll fall apart eventually. The kind of rock that doesn't fall apart is the lava rock, but there are no volcanoes around here that I can see. So you'd have to get them from out west somewhere, and then that's very expensive. Then it'd be very expensive. Yes, sir.
Looking at expenses, you think CNU will not contest this using state money for religious?
I can't answer that question. The question is, can you use state money to buy these things? I can't answer that question. You're going to have to ask somebody else. Yes, sir.
Probably here in Michigan, IDF may benefit from trying to help fund this. Yeah.
No, but because in other groups we ask money for the chapel, and they don't allow that because that's a church. That's mixing church and state.
Well, again, if you're going to put on a religious program for somebody, and you have an obligation to do that.
I'm referring to the street lodge, building street lodge.
Well, this is a part of their religious practice. Just like if you have a chapel, you build a chapel, that costs money.
We are not allowed to give money for chapel.
Pardon?
We are not allowed to use money.
No, I mean somebody built that chapel, and somebody put money from the state into that chapel to build it.
Donations.
You mean your chapels are all donated on the outside? Is that right? I'm sorry, I didn't know that. Well, what about your supplies for like a Catholic Mass or supplies for Protestant worship service? What do you do? What do you do? What do you do? Do you buy those with state funds? You get a budget from the state for that, don't you? This is the same thing, except it's a Native American religion, that's all, yes.
In my experience, the volunteers who bring in stuff for math, the wine, the wafers, the priest brings that in. We don't buy that.
Well, we don't let the priest do that at our institution.
We don't have a priest at my institution.
I'm the priest, and I don't allow myself to do that. No, we don't permit anybody to bring any kind of food or liquids or powders or anything like that in the institution. That's too dangerous, we think. So if anybody comes, we buy the Mass wine, and we buy the altar breads for Protestant worship service, for the communion service, and for Mass. And we buy the sweetgrass, and the sage, and the cedar, and so forth. And we don't permit anybody to bring any kind of food in like that because it's too difficult, to check that. How can you check that? At the Ohio Penitentiary, when I first started to work there in about 1980, they were permitting visitors to bring in complete meals to the men in the visiting room. Can you imagine that? I mean the custodial concern was just monstrous, and the problem was monstrous. Well, they let the families from home send them a Christmas package. Every one of those bags had to be opened and strained. Every one of those cans had to be opened and examined. It was just amazing. So they finally says, that's it, no more. They're not going to have it anymore. So the point is that we don't let them do this, bring this stuff in. We take care of this. If the rabbi needs matzahs, we get the matzahs for the rabbi. We don't let him do it himself, because we consider that too dangerous, too risky. Let's see. So it's going to be. It might be expensive. It's not going to be as easy as you think. You're talking about the rocks. It's very good if the volunteers bring them in, but you better make sure the volunteers are going to have the time to look for these rocks to bring them in, because it's going to take some time. Hopefully they'll be able to do that. Then, when the men go out to the sweat lodge, nobody stays with them in the sweat lodge at all. They are in there by themselves, and they perform their ceremonies by themselves. I don't see how it's possible, to be honest with you, to have someone in a sweat lodge in a supervisory role the whole time that's out there. First of all, you can't see in the sweat lodge. It's covered. The lodge is covered completely. All the light is kept out, and there's a lot of steam in there, and so it's almost impossible to see in there when you're in the sweat lodge. So I don't think that a man that was in the sweat lodge could supervise the other men completely in the sweat lodge. And again, you know, our experience at Milan is that nothing occurs in the sweat lodge that we need to have a man inside to take care of. The men understand that if anything serious happens out there, that they would lose their privilege, and it's a privilege since in prison and security concerns are uppermost, that they would lose their ability to have the sweat lodge in prison. The other ceremonies that the men have, they do a sacred pipe ceremony weekly in the institution inside. They are given a room and all the necessary things that they need to do this, and they perform their own sacred pipe pipe ceremony. Also, we give them permission to do a sacred drum ceremony too whenever they want to do this. All in all, I think that the Native American religion as practiced at Milan at the present time, I think it is safe, and I think it is secure, and I think it is very beneficial to the Native American Indians who are engaged in it. Thank you.
Thank you, Father Dinger. Did any of you have any questions for Chaplain Dinger from the federal prison in Milan? Did you have any questions that you wanted to ask him?
Have you had any problems with the medicine bags as far as having any type of contraband like marijuana or something inside?
Okay, Father Dinger.
The question is, have we had any problems with medicine bags, especially with relationship to drugs like marijuana and so forth? No, we have not. Not at all. Again, it's a very sacred object to these men. For them to do it would be a great sacrilege, I think, in their own eyes, first of all. Secondly, again, you know, if we did discover that this was going on, they would immediately cut out then the use of the medicine pouches.
You have a question of that?
What would necessitate the religion in a facility and the objects that would be used as far as numbers would be concerned? How many men?
Well, at Milan, at one time, during the past few years, we had about 40 Native Americans there at one time, and then it was rather extensive, the number of men that went out to the sweat lodge. In fact, we were thinking about having 2 sweat lodges a week for them, so they all could go out and really participate. I didn't understand the first part of your question, though.
Well, to have it introduced into the facility, how many participants would you have to be ejected?
Well, I don't know. He's asking how many participants would necessitate an institution having a sweat lodge. Well, again, you know, these men are permitted to practice their religion. They have a right to do that. And I think that even if you had a small number, you know, maybe even 3 or 4 or 5, I think you still have to give them whatever facility they needed in order to practice their religion. I think they have a right to that. Yes, sir.
You may have addressed this, I probably missed it. How often is the sweat lodge used?
The question is, how often do we have a sweat lodge? Every week. Unless, of course, there's a special Native American day they want to celebrate, and then we let them have it twice a week. On the regular Thursday, we have it on Thursday regularly, and then another day, too, if there happened to be a special Native American holy day occurring. Yes, sir.
How many can use the lodge at one time? How many people can be in there?
Well, the question is, how many can use the lodge at one time? Well, you can build the lodge, you know, for any amount of people. It's up to, you know, in fact, that's one of the factors you should take into consideration when you're going to construct it. The lodge that we have would hold probably 10 or 11 or 12 people. Yes, sir.
Is there any particular reason that you have the ceremony on Thursday?
The question is, any particular reason why we have it on Thursday? No particular religious reason, but a question of security. It's the day in which the chaplains schedule for other religious programs is so constructed that we can have the sweat lodge on those days. But there's no special day of the week that the sweat lodge needs to be observed. It can be any day. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
We have a general policy of equalizing time among the religions. Does this 6-hour time, including the prep time, cause other problems with other religions, or are you required to give several more hours to the other religions?
The question is, because the sweat lodge occupies such a large block of time, equality of time in exercising of other religions, is there a problem there? And we say no. Of course, we have religious programs all day long and all evening, 7 days a week. We have religious programs in the morning from 7:30 until 3:30 in the afternoon, till afternoon count. Then we have them in the evening from 5 o'clock until 8:30, until the 9 o'clock count. So every day, and they can come over and exercise, practice their faith, in any way they want to during those times. So we had no problem with that. Yes, sir.
Is the sweat lodge something that's common to all of the Native Americans in this area? I mean, does it accommodate all?
The question is the sweat lodge traditional to all the Native Americans? I think these other people could answer the question better than I could, but from my own experience, it is traditional. This is the traditional thing, and legally speaking, that's the way it is too. In the court case that was brought against the Federal Bureau of Prisons with regard to the institution of this sweat lodge, it was brought out that this is the most traditional form of worship for Native Americans, although it might be conducted in different ways according to different tribes. Yes, sir.
Is the sweat lodge built inside the facility? And the second question is, who spent, where did you get a budget for building that?
There's two questions. First of all, the question was, is the sweat lodge built within the confines of the institution? Yes, it is. It's within the fences. And the second question is, do we have a budget for that? Yes, we do have a budget for that. We have a budget in the federal prison for religious services department. Yes, sir.
I would just say the drum ceremony also takes place in the sweat lodge.
The question is, does the drum ceremony also take place in the sweat lodge? Yes, there is. I think, and again, the Native Americans tell you better than I can. I think there is also a use of the drum for praying during the sweat lodge also. But we have it also inside too, if the men want to do it. And sometimes we would let them take the drum out to the yard, which is separate from the sweat lodge area where everybody else is, except they go to a corner by themselves and they'll have a drum ceremony by themselves. Sometimes we do that in the summertime. Somebody had a question back here. Yes, sir.
Question regarding who is able to use the sweat lodge. Some prisoners may, out of curiosity, say, I think I'd like to try that. So is there a stipulation as to how long they have to be in the group? Because some may want to join up for nefarious reasons that may jeopardize those that really are members, sincere members. Who determines who gets to go in there?
So the question is, may people who are non-Native Americans participate in the sweat lodge? And I'll give you a little bit of history on that. When we first began the sweat lodge, we only let the Native Americans go out. And they liked that because, this was something which is their own, But as time went on, other men asked about it, and other men wanted to go out. Now, we have a rule in the Bureau of Prisons that any inmate may go to any religious service he wants to, as long as he is not disrespectful and not disruptive. Okay, that's our rule. So if a man comes and says, we'd like to participate in the sweat lodge, and if the Native Americans have no objection to this, to non-Native Americans doing this, then we'll do that. In fact, at the present time, we have about 3 or 4 men who are not Native Americans who participate and practice the Native American religion. Yes, sir.
You give identified Native American prisoners the authority to make that decision?
We don't give them the authority. We ask them, does this present a problem to you? In other words, for our other men.
If they say yes, it is a problem.
Well, then what we think is this then, if there's going to be a problem, we'd rather not send a man out there and have a fight, and have to close down the sweat lodge, see. So what we're trying to do there is preclude some kind of confrontation. It's just like with anything else, if there's a group in the prison and if other men coming to that group and so forth would, trying to break into it and so forth would cause a problem, well then we want to avoid that problem. Yes, sir.
Do you give that same authority to other religions? Other denominations?
We've not had the problem with other religions. In other words, they've never said anything to us that this represented something which was offensive to them in the practice of the religious faith. Yes, sir.
A person can switch their religious allegiance as many times as they choose?
We've been around and around on this with our central office in Washington, and the information we always gotten back was that if a man says that he practices a certain religion, we have to take his word for it, legally speaking. Our legal department says we have to take his word.
How many times is...
Well, again, you know, if I ask a man what religion he practices, he says he's Roman Catholic, then I have to accept the fact that he's a Roman Catholic. If he says he's a Native American, I have to accept the fact that he's a Native American. So
How often can he change?
He could change as often as he wanted, theoretically. Although we don't have that thing happening in the prison, though. People don't change their religion, you know, every day. That's not been our experience, in other words. Now, you might have some people that do that, and we probably have had one or two men that have done that, and we've sat down and said, now listen, you know, make up your mind. What do you want to be? We're very happy to help you practice your religion, but let's get it settled. What do you want to be? And you can't practice 3 or 4 religions at one time. You know, you're either one or the other. We do that to the men. But for the most part, though, it's a general rule. If they say that they're practicing, there's kind of a religious adherent, we have to accept that. Yes, sir.
What level is Milan? Do they have it? I mean, compared
Medium level. It
Jim?
was a 3 before.
Okay. Jim had a question.
Yes, sir.
One more question. If a person declares their commitment to a religion at the outset when they enter the prison door...
They do, in fact, sir. We have a religious survey that we take them through.
Okay. Now, that can be changed at will.
Yeah.
And then, do you have then a list, a set specified list, which is a recognized religion by the department, et cetera, and then if they don't fall into that list, do you add to that list, or how do you accommodate the individual?
So the question is, how do we establish the validity of a religion in the prison? Well, we don't really do it ourselves. Central office does that. If there's any doubt about it, we contact central office, and they give us a legal position on the validity of that religion. Otherwise, but if it's a valid religion, accepted religion, then they're allowed to practice it.
What's the criteria?
Well, you know, there was a case in federal court with regard to a religion some of the inmates began in their own prison, you know, called the Church of the New Song, it was called. And I think during the course of that trial, they determined that if it recognizes a supreme being, you know, and has a ritual, that it is considered legally to be a religion. It's very, very simple legal test for the legality of a religion in the United States. So, and we have an obligation then to help these men to practice their religion. We have no choice in that. Yes, sir.
If you can't see what's going on inside the sweat lodge, how do you supervise what the activity?
How do we supervise what?
Yeah. How are you sure that there is nothing nefarious going on inside?
Well, if you're asking for absolute certitude, we don't have it. But if you're asking...
Are the prisoners searched after they leave the sweat lodge?
Well, the sweat lodge, they shake it down. Is that what you mean?
Body searches.
No, when they come out of the sweat lodge, they're just wearing their shorts or just wearing a bathing trunks.
Do you sit in a chair outside the sweat lodge for a few hours while this is going on?
No, we have the man in the tower with binoculars who watches the sweat lodge. No, they can't see anything going on inside the sweat lodge. But nothing serious has ever happened there.
I have a question about that.
Yes, sir.
Our prisoners search them before they enter the sweat lodge?
No, sir.
They're not searched before they enter or after they come out?
No, sir. Yes, sir.
Who supervises the pipe ceremony on the job site?
The chaplain staff. The chaplain says that. It's right in the chapter, the Religious Services Department areas where they do these things, when they do them inside.
The
question was what type of tarp or skin is used to cover the lodge. Usually we try to use a canvas type. You'll find some people in other areas who might use a plastic tarp, but myself I prefer just to use a canvas type because it can breathe a little bit better than covering it with plastic. Anything else?
Are they completely naked and inside the sweat lodge? Are they wearing towels or?
The question is, are they completely naked inside the sweat lodge? No, usually people will have a towel, or in some cases they'll wear shorts on in.
Is it an option though? Can they be completely naked?
It is an option. Usually what people will do is they'll cover themselves while they go in. Once they get in there, and once it gets hot, then they usually will uncover because it's pretty hot in there.
Can I just answer that just for a minute? We have a rule at Milan that they must wear something going into the sweat lodge, and they must wear something coming out of the sweat lodge. We don't make any rules about, whether they take it off inside the sweat lodge or not. That's up to them because it's private in there. But when they come out, they have to have something.
Also, when they go inside of a sweat lodge, usually the one who's running the lodge will tell them not to wear any type of metal, such as a ring or watches or any type of necklace, because it can also heat up in there. Yes, sir.
Hey, Andy, on that, the pictures that went around, I had a question I noticed. That little hole there, that was a big hole there. They had that fire going and heat those stones for that picture. That looked rather large to me. Is that because that sweat lodge is larger in there? They're using that bigger? When we talk about this, I never thought about that pile of rocks. It looks like a lot of rocks there. It's like a big hole, big fire.
That's probably the reason that the pictures look that way is because the pit's been there probably for 5 or 6 years. And also, like I say, it's going to vary from region to region on what type of lodge you have. Now, the particular pictures that you have seen, they're set up for like Sioux, and they'll build a pretty good sized bonfire to heat their lodges. Whereas here in Michigan, the fire will be smaller and the fire pit will be smaller. And we usually clean our rocks out to where there's not a big buildup of rocks like that. Once they start building up, we'll take them out and put them back. Do we have any more questions on Sweat Lodge?
I have another one, Andy. That aspect is, once that area is all consecrated, they've been using it as a sweat lodge. My understanding is that can't be used for anything else then. Is that area then secured off from the rest of the prison? I mean, nobody else would go in that area, right? Once we set it up for the sweat lodge, we're not going to use that piece of property for anything else, right?
The question was, once the sweat lodge is constructed in there, as far as will anything else be used in that area? Hopefully, that particular area will just be used for the sweat lodge. Maybe a particular institution might set aside where they're going to set up the lodge, and that's where the sweat lodge will stay.
In Milan, we put it in a place where no one ever goes to. In other words, it's not a part of the outside yard or anything like that.
Again, it's going to be, you're going to find where some institutions, you will never receive a request to have a sweat lodge. And different institutions probably have better setups. Myself, where I work at Chippewa Temporary, I don't really see a place where we could set up a sweat lodge there because of the way the yard's laid out. And the outside wall is, we have fences between them, but they're not too far away. If you had a lodge built there, it'd be visible. So, I'm quite sure that to where you set it up, it would be good to have privacy there because obviously the lodge is going to be run during the daytime.
This is Mike Powell from the training section in Lansing. In April of 1992, Steve Winchester and I traveled to the Federal Correctional Institution at Milan, Michigan to watch inmates using the sweat lodge that they have constructed in the south yard. We went at the invitation of Father Claire Dinger. Steve is going to narrate this portion of the tape to explain some of the things you'll see.
Prior to opening up the bundle, I wrote down on the manifest all the items I had within it. And when I opened it up, she was double-checking with the things that on it. She would ask me, which is this item, which is that item. I went through and identified each thing for her. That as being the striker and the flint. This is a sweetgrass, and I had a tobacco pouch over it to keep it from spreading throughout the bundle. And that is sage that I just identified. I had different containers full of tobacco, and one was in a plastic bag and one was in a Bull Durham bag. This is a fur that's kept with this bundle, a small mink skin.
Birch bark scroll.
This particular item here is specific to this bundle. Not all pipe carriers or people that carry a bundle would have this item in there. And that most people just bring in a pipe bag and have the basic elements in there as far as a pipe stem, the flint and striker, and the 4 medicines, sweetgrass, sage, tobacco. Also, you can see on the counter there is an eagle feather. I opened up each individual little bag and identified the contents of it.
What's up, Mark? Thanks.
Prior to opening the bundle, I asked the officer if she was going to touch any of the items within it, and she said no, that she respected the Native American culture, and that all I had to do was identify each thing for her.
Rattle?
This is a shaker or rattle that is used within the ceremonies.
This is the pipe stem.
At this point, I am taking out the pipe stem to show her, and also to show her that there's nothing else within that pouch that I keep the stem in. Now, each person that carries a bundle or has a pipe bag will have their items in their own particular style or manner. There is no set pattern of how everything is to be done. Right now I am taking out the pipe bowl, black stone bowl.
What was that?
Bowl. Pipe bowl.
Yeah.
And then I was showing her that inside the container for the bowl that I had some other items in there, some shells, mega shells, seashells.
How are they, Taylor?
4 of those.
Hang on a minute. I have room. I'm sorry, what was that last thing?
Magus shells.
Omegas?
The shakedown went very smoothly as far as having everything else identified prior to the opening of the bundle. And there was no questions as, well, why is this being brought in or why is that being brought in? The location of the sweat lodge at the Milan Federal Prison. Directly behind the cameraman is the gun tower. So the prisoners are under direct supervision at all times. This area here is the fire pit, and they're preparing it to heat up the rocks. They have a large pile to the right side here that they're putting the rocks into the pit. This individual is raking out the area to clean it out. These particular stones are a lot larger than the stones that are used for the sweat lodges in the Great Lakes regions or the Three Fires people, Michigan. This is the framework of the sweat lodge. And right here identifies the cloth being hung from the center of the lodge and tobacco ties. And right there is the doorway, the entrance to the sweat lodge. And in the middle is the stone pit. This is in the middle of the lodge. It's up to 12 inches deep, and that's where the heated rocks will be placed. This particular lodge is built for the Sioux rituals, Lakota Sioux from South Dakota. And there's a much larger frame than the Great Lakes regions, what we use here. There is a buffalo skull used on their altar, which we do not use also. So these primary areas that you're seeing here are basically of the Lakota Sioux people. I'm not trying to talk bad against them or anything in that respect, is that each tribe does their sweat lodge ceremonies differently. The rocks here to the left are the rocks that were used in previous sweat lodge ceremonies. At this stage, they're preparing the sweat lodge by putting the blankets on to keep the heat and the steam within the lodge. They're going to put a number of coverings on this so it will be completely dark inside. As I mentioned earlier, this is quite a large structure. The sweat lodges used in Michigan and the surrounding area in the Great Lakes would be about a third of this size. I asked why this was so large, and at one time they had a large number of prisoners using the sweat lodge there at Milan, and they had to use numerous rounds or sequences to the sweat lodge to accommodate everyone. Right now is a storage shed area where they keep all the tarps and blankets when they're not in use. And this area is not open to the general yard or other prisoners. This area is specifically for the Native American Indians to have their sweat lodge ceremonies. So no one has access to this except custody staff. They're putting on several layers of cloth or wool blankets, and then they put on the tarps. These stones around the outside of them are to help keep the tarps from blowing off in the wind, and to keep it dark on the inside, to keep the tarps close to the earth. The tarps that they were using were old army tents, military issue, and these work very well because they helped the breathing technique for the steam to get out versus using plastic tarps. The surrounding area shows their wood supply, which these people particularly receive from shipments into their warehouse, and they get to use all the old pallets to use for the wood. It takes approximately half hour to 45 minutes to set up the lodge by putting all the tarps on. Now this individual is preparing the rocks in different layers and stacking the wood at different parts for the stones to heat them up. Now this particular ritual that is being filmed was a special ritual that was given to them by one of their medicine people from Dakota. And this isn't the usual ceremony that is used. They have 45 rocks in this particular fire. It depends on the conductor of the ceremony, but the maximum amount would be no more than 24, 16 to 24 rocks. Now this is a completed covering of the sweat lodge. And this individual is at the doorway at this time. You'll see him open it up, and they're going to place blankets on the inside so they'll have something to sit on during the ceremony. This particular day, it was only like 30 degrees out. It was very cold. The federal system has the luxury of obtaining government surplus goods from the Army, and they were lucky to receive this type of covering. They completed stacking all the wood and the rocks and then started the fire. Once again, this is quite large compared to what we use in the Michigan system. And it would depend on who the conductor is of the sweat lodge, on how large the fire is going to be, how many rocks are going to be used. The time has lapsed here to where all the wood had burned down and had heated all the rocks. They have a special tool that was designed for them to rake the rocks away from the ashes. Now this is a very long rake, but as you can see, this is a very large area and wouldn't necessarily be used in the Michigan prison system. At this point, they're trying to separate the rocks to get them ready to put inside the lodge. As I mentioned before, that this is a different ceremony that was given to them for this particular day. And they're going to be placing the rocks right into the sweat lodge. The normal procedure is that everyone gets into the sweat lodge first, and then the rocks are placed in. And the doorman, the person that's holding the rocks in the shovel or the pitchfork, will then put in the other items that are needed to be used during the ceremony, and they would close the door and proceed from there. But just to identify the certain elements of how the sweat lodge is set up and how the ritual is conducted, these are very good shots of showing the techniques. They were placing the stones inside by the rake or the pitchfork to a person inside that has either some 2 long sticks that are forked or deer antlers to pick the rock up off from the shovel and place it into the center pit and arrange the rocks in the way that they want to be used. And these rocks are very hot at this point. A pitchfork or a shovel with holes in it is recommended so that the ashes would fall out and not be taken inside the lodge. The excess smoke would be burning to the eyes. Right there, the prisoner had just taken the antlers out down to his bottom left. This is another overview shot. At this point, the prisoners are starting to disrobe and prepare to enter the lodge. There is a hand drum that they're going to use during the ceremony. Now, the prisoners are to be in shorts when they go into the lodge. place all their clothes on the blanket or around the surrounding area. All these individuals will be inside the lodge at one point or another before the ceremony starts. Right there in front of the person with the shovel is a bucket. And that bucket is the water bucket that they use to put on the rocks, the steam. And there's a wooden dipper in there. And at certain points of the ceremony, they'll dip into that bucket and place the water on the rocks, which produces the steam. Now, some conductors will be bringing in certain medicines to be placed in that water to help the people during the sweat lodge. I spoke with these Native American Indian people here. They were from South Dakota, about the sweat lodge, and that they were grateful that they could be helping other people out. And that's why they let us film this day. Most all these people here are Lakota Sioux. And I talked with them about the differences between the Great Lakes region and the Dakotas and how the ritual took place. As I mentioned before, that this ceremony, they were going to be placing 45 rocks within the sweat lodge. To begin with, they were going to put the 22 in. And at the break, going through other ritual and pipe ceremonies, they would open the door and put in the remaining rocks. Here at Milan Federal Prison, the prisoners are escorted out to the area and left, and then the guard in the tower provides the supervision. This is a good identification of the water bucket and the deer antlers that are used during the ceremony, and the wooden ladle that's in the top of the bucket there. Firekeeper or the doorman is preparing the rocks for the next sequence of the ceremony. They'll be placing more wood on the fire, gathering all the rocks in one area to keep the heat concentrated. At times the rocks that come out of the fire pit to go into the sweat lodge are red glowing hot. They're very hot rocks. At this point, the men are entering the lodge to take their position inside. The doorman is getting instructions from them, from the conductor of the lodge, indicating what he wants done with what. The water and the dipper are being placed within the lodge. There are still a few other participants yet to go in. Within a few minutes, they asked us to quit filming because they were going to start their ceremonies. This particular ceremony started with the drumming. Hand drum that they took in earlier. And B went and got some items that are usually in the medicine bundle or a pipe carrier's bag, and we request that you do not touch these items, that you can view them. They're on the list.
Can you tell us what they are?
Yeah, I was going to indicate it. Checked off the list. There should be flint back there, a striker for the flint, the punk wood, or the scatagan. Should be eagle feathers, the medicines, sage, cedar, sweetgrass, tobacco. There should be some fur back there that has some significance to that bundle.
This is a dried, it's been set out in the sunlight. A real fresh braid of sweetgrass would be a real dark green. And for those of you that have smelt it as it was taken around, it has a real sweet odor to it. This again was used for attracting good thoughts, feelings, spirits.
A question of curiosity. I was addicted to smoking for many, many years, and finally was able to kick the habit approximately 4 or 5 years ago. Now, this is just for pleasure, recreation. These people, would you frown upon that? Does it happen? I mean, you use it, smoke tobacco for no reason, except for recreation.
Just like the non-Indian world around us, we partake in some bad habits, and many of us smoke. I myself had smoked until last October, and I haven't had a smoke since then, other than smoking of the pipe and in ceremonies.
In cases of the pipe, when that's being smoked, the tobacco isn't drawn down into your lungs. It's usually, that tobacco and the prayers that are in there isn't for you to smoke it. So, you inhale it or bring it to your mouth, but then you put it back out because it's for the spirits. If you want a cigarette, that's something different.
These are by no means all the items that might be in a medicine bag or a bundle that's bought in for a sweat lodge, but these are the general items that will be there. And we wanted you to have the opportunity to actually see and actually smell the items.
Develop a technique in terms of lighting the punk rock. After a while, can you do it 1 or 2 times, or?
There again, it's a matter of spiritual belief, and our old folks tell us that if it don't start within 4 strikes, there's a reason it doesn't start. Match will start every time, though.
During the ceremony, do you use all of these? I mean, do you use the sage with the white cedar, or can you pick and choose which you use?
Generally, all of these items will be used during, and I'm only speaking here of the sweat lodge ceremony. The sweetgrass will be used, the sage would be used, the cedar, as well as tobacco. All of those items would be used. Sometimes for our Lakota brothers and sisters, they would use tobacco ties, maybe not as big as this, but they would have quite a number of those tobacco ties that would be spread all the way around the sweat lodge and tied, all strung together on a string.
This is the bloodstone pipe, and this is the bowl part. This represents the male end. And for Indian people, you'll notice that it has a round end. This type of pipe would represent that it would belong to a male. Now you'll find other pipes that don't have this protruding part out. They'll just come right straight down from the stem. That would usually be a pipe that the female would carry. This is the stem part here that goes in to the pipe here. Also, we have a striker. It's made out of steel. It's used to strike flint. Right. There's different kinds of flint. This is a black chunk, but it pretty much all works the same. Also, I have here, this is a tamp. We used for the tobacco to keep it going or to pack it down. And this is a eagle bone whistle. Also have the punk wood. Myself, I have a small bag of it and just take it out as needed to light the fire. The punk wood is used to put against the flint, like so. And then when you strike it, the spark comes up onto the punk wood, and that's used to either light the sweat lodge fires or to put in the pipe when it's full of tobacco.
At this moment is just discuss the Michigan Commission on Indian Affairs. The handout that I passed out dealt with the Michigan Commission on Indian Affairs. If you look on the handout, the memo from Mr. Bolden to the ward is dated March 16th that I've just distributed. Item number 6. I have contacted the interim executive director of the Michigan Commission on Indian Affairs, and they are very happy and agreeable to helping us out on a couple different points, and it's something that has come up in our discussions with the Native American representatives. When you have a volunteer or a prisoner assistant who wants to lead a pipe ceremony or a drum ceremony or help in terms of the sweat lodge ceremony, the Michigan Commission on Indian Affairs is willing to have you call them, and they will give you the telephone number of a local tribe that you can contact to make sure that person is recognized within the Native American religious groups as a pipe carrier, as a spiritual leader, or whatever is appropriate. The reason that we're doing this is so that we don't because the Native American religion does not necessarily have a higher authority that we can go to with some of the other religious groups that we have. So the arrangement we're making, if a person walks up to the door, they want to fill out the form, become a volunteer for the Native Americans at your institution to help run the religious activities, we needed some way to help you find out if that person is legitimate or not. So I've talked to Betty, and she is very willing for you to call her, give her the name of the person that has said that they're a spiritual leader or that they're a pipe carrier. She will give you the name of the local tribe contact that you can call them. They will say, well, let's say this person is up for the summer or something up in the UP. That local tribe can tell you whether that person is recognized, or they may be from another state up for the summer or something visiting. That local tribe should have some information on that person or can obtain some information to get back to you on whether that person is legitimate. we needed a way to verify our volunteers. So that's where the Michigan Commission on Indian Affairs comes into play. They also have a newsletter that they send out. And Betty said if you're interested in receiving the newsletter on the Michigan Commission for Indian Affairs, give her a call or either just drop her a note and she will add your name to the mailing list. I wasn't comfortable with requesting that she add all of the prisons to the mailing list because I haven't seen the newsletter myself yet to get an idea of some of the content and if you would be interested. So if you think you might be interested, just give her office a call. They're perfectly willing to add you to the mailing list or either write her a note.
I'm Chaplain Ray Moore from Kinross Correctional Facility. I've been asked to give kind of an overview of our experiences with the Native American traditional way at Kinross. And I think it might be helpful to some of you to hear the kinds of things that we encountered in getting the program in place that we have. A brief chronology of our experience began about mid-1989 when some of our Native American prisoners approached me about setting up services or programs for them. And they had an officer that was willing to work with them on that. That officer turned out to be Andrew Leblanc, that you've already heard from several times today. He was at our facility at the time and then soon transferred to one of the other facilities when it opened, thereby qualifying him to become a volunteer back at our facility. So the first course of action we took was to set up a meeting with the Special Activities Director, myself, and some possible volunteers from the Native American community around Kinross. And so we had that meeting, that first meeting in August of 1989. Present were Andrew LeBlanc's wife, Kathy, and Bucko were two of the five that came to speak with us. At that time, we were attempting to discern whether it should be considered as a religious program or come under special activities as a cultural program. And I think everybody decided that more than not it should be considered in the religious programming of the facility. So we listened to the request of the potential volunteers, the kind of concerns that they had, things that they would suggest be considered for inside of our facility. We took that back to the warden. He forwarded it to central office. September 6th of '89, we've got notice from central office that they were forwarding the request to the Chaplains Advisory Council with the recommendation that they be granted recognition for meeting purposes, primarily at that point to have a pipe ceremony. And that was kind of what came out of our initial meeting with Bucko and the others that came to the facility. The Chaplains Advisory Council, in their November 3rd, 1989 minutes, approved it, and the first meeting for the Native American Traditional Way in our facility began May 5th, 1990. At that point, as all of our religious programs have, they usually have a prisoner representative who represents the concerns of the group to my office in conjunction with the volunteers. He began to represent the group, and he was the one that expressed the concerns about getting something started in the first place, so he was like a kid with a new toy. And he was at my office about every time I turned around with some new request that he wanted to initiate, wanted recognition for and practice. And that became one of the problem areas, is because not having dealt with such issues before, we weren't sure whether what he was requesting was legitimate or not. And finally it got to the point where I had to say to him, look, don't present anything to me until you have first cleared it with the volunteers. They are the people that we're going to recognize as an authoritative voice as to whether this is needful, whether this is essential to the conducting of your faith in here. And so once we got that established, things went along pretty well. So we insisted that they clear it with the volunteers first. One of the problems that we had with the inmate leadership also as a representative was that not all of the other prisoners in the group recognized whatever authority he had, because they weren't certain whether the volunteer was the voice of authority or whether this inmate representative was. And so I had some of them writing me letters from within the group saying, we don't recognize this guy. And others would write and say, I'm the only authorized pipe carrier that's in this group. Here's my serial number or my registration number. And until one individual got transferred from our facility, things were getting hot enough that it was probably just about to have a fight out in the yard someplace. So it stressed even more importantly that the primary voice that we were going to listen to came from the volunteer sector, and the inmate representative may come up and present requests after it was cleared with the volunteers, or the volunteers could talk to me directly about it. We were fortunate enough to have a corrections officer come back as a volunteer, which was very beneficial because we didn't then have to spend a lot of time with Andrew and his wife Kathy and the other volunteers that came in going over security issues, because being an officer you already knew what to look for, and we could rest somewhat comfortably that as they led the groups that they were not going to be tolerating a lot of manipulation and skullduggery going on behind the scenes in the name of putting this program through. Some of the areas that became problematic to us had to do with the proliferation or the multiplicity of things that were important within the Native American tradition. As you saw on the table back there, all of those kinds of items there were things that corrections officers weren't used to seeing in a facility. And so that presents real security problems because not just everybody has those kinds of items. And it seemed like, as I said, every time I turned around there was a new thing that was being asked to be cleared to come in. And corrections officers were coming to me and saying, what's going on, Chaplain? You know, every time we turn around something new is happening. And I said, well, we're trying to work with our volunteers and we're trying to get a clear picture as to what's allowable, what's not, so we're feeling our way through, and we're just going to have to be patient until we get some definitive direction from our volunteers as well as from Lansing as to what we can and cannot do. Storage of items became an issue. What items went where? Because as the pipe ceremony began, then things like the sweetgrass and sage began to get introduced, like we want to bring those things in, the inmates want to have access to them. So I had to go through the inspector and say, are we allowing these things or not? And the warden and the inspectors would get together and finally say, well, yeah, the sage can come in and the sweetgrass, but you're going to have to store it in your storage closet, and then you give it out to them a small bit at a time for use, but it's not just going to be in their group's cabinet so that they can have access to it anytime they want to. So this is kind of like, you know, give and take negotiation phase that we've been going through for a couple of years, feeling our way along in it so that we try to keep everybody happy. The next thing that came then was they wanted to make bone choker necklaces. And so many of these things were coming that finally the warden says, schedule a meeting with the prisoner leaders, and you and I and the ADW for programs will sit down and try to collect all of these concerns together, and we'll have this meeting, and then I'll take their suggestions or requests under advisement, and we'll get something back to them. So we had that meeting around October of last year, and we discussed things like the bone choker necklace, and so they drew a picture and diagrammed it all out what they wanted to do, and then we gave permission to order, but the stipulation was that they could only make them as a part of their regular every other Thursday night meeting. And when they were done with the items, the volunteers had to take them outside the facility along with the needles and thread and all that sort of thing until a future date when maybe they wanted to do another session of making these items. So we were involving hobbycraft items, and hobbycraft didn't want to store all these items over there. And so the warden says, okay, we'll do this, provided the volunteers will take these items in and out and then clear it with you in advance before they're going to come in and do it. So that's how we handle something like that. The warden considered the issue of the drumming and dancing and singing. They wanted to be able to do it out in the yard. The warden says, no, we're not going to allow it out in the yard, but you can do it as a part of your Thursday night meeting. He would allow a drum in, but he wanted to see it first or know the size of it all. And you know, so it was just, and where are we going to store it when it finally comes in? These are all considerations that we never had to deal with before. Obviously, problems that we've discussed already and touched upon is the issue of the shakedown. information desk people seeing these items come through. They couldn't believe the list that I first handed them in terms of the first meeting of things that would be coming through. And then the stipulation about mail-only shakedown. I wasn't quite sure how I was going to word that in a memo so that somebody didn't get insulted or offended, or security trying to determine who's this chaplain, that he's trying to tell us what we can shake down and what we can and who's going to do it. So I want to read for you a sample memo dated 3/27/90, which was the first one that authorized the items to come in. And you will see that this is probably written like I was running for an office or as a politician, but it was titled Native American Services. Beginning on Thursday, April 5th at 6:30 p.m. in the Annex, Room 218, and continuing every other Thursday thereafter, a new religious cultural group will be meeting under volunteer leadership entitled the Native American Traditional Way. Indian volunteers will have ID cards on file and will be allowed to bring the following items in with them on a permanent manifest basis. While male and female volunteers will be shaken down by male and female officers, respectively, please ensure that only male officers shake down the following items: medicine pipe, tobacco, regular store purchased, matches and/or steel striker and pieces of punkwood, eagle feathers, a small bundle of tiny stones, tamp, bone awl for cleaning pipes, leather pouch for tobacco and cedar. All the above items will be carried or wrapped in some type of carpet, hide, or bag. And I put a little note at the bottom. Officers should be aware of the sensitive spiritual significance these items carry for the volunteers and allow their owners to hand each item to be shaken down to the officer conducting the search and not just rummage through the items. So that was an attempt to try to convey to security that these items are significant and they have a spiritual significance to them. And so please respect them accordingly, rather than just rummage through things. So that gives you a little bit of the idea for the approximately 2 years that we've had services conducted for our Indian population, the kind of things that we went through. But the volunteer leadership is very, very important in that because other prisoners just aren't going to respect the leadership of other prisoners. It's just not going to work. So I think each program is going to be about as good as the volunteers who conduct that program in there. And it calls, especially in the starting up stages, for a real close working relationship between the chaplain, representatives of the administration, and the volunteer leaders. And so we don't have a sweat lodge at this point, but we understand that we're probably going to be getting one fairly soon. We do have the pipe ceremony now, and so we're kind of looking to see what comes out of this meeting here and what Lansing says we can do to begin this. And I, of course, had questions about what's going to be my role in a sweat lodge. Am I going to be going in and sitting in there with them? Just how all is this going to fit together? So this has been a good day to answer some of those questions. So that's about a brief overview of what our experience has been with it. Do you have questions of me regarding this?
Why every other week? Why not weekly?
That's all they've requested at this point, and that's all that our volunteer leadership currently is willing to give to the program. So it's really dependent upon their schedule, not because they couldn't be given an every week meeting.
Are you present during the services?
No, because we have volunteer leadership, and at our level facility, volunteer leadership does not require staff in-room supervision. We're a level 2 facility. Tim?
Ray, this is more of a comment than a question. I want to express my appreciation for the thoroughness with which you just presented yourself, and also the obvious professionalism in which you conducted yourself as a chaplain in order to facilitate this with the Native Americans and their religion. I think that also indicates clearly to the department the concerns of the Chaplains Advisory Council of the need to continue to bring on board a strongly qualified and professionally trained people in this capacity. So thanks for your presentation on this topic.
Anyone else?
Have you gone into sweat lodge?
Have I ever been in one? No, I've never seen one other than the pictures and also the pictures and some of the literature that's been shown to me by our prisoner volunteers and the prisoner representative.
Would you be willing to go?
I'd be willing to go and look. I think I might have some reservations about being present in one while it was in use.
How are you going to fund the building of your sweat lodge?
That's going to be determined, I guess, by the state. I'll be very interested in the answer to that question.
Marge Van Ochten, head of the Hearings Division. My division is responsible for the hearings that we do in the institutions. The hearing officers who do the disciplinary hearings, for example, work for the Hearings Division, do the hearings in your institutions. But besides the hearings that we're responsible for, we also are responsible for all the litigation filed against the department. The department, of course, is actually represented in court by the Attorney General's office, but since we have so many lawsuits and so much information needs to be gathered and so many other things need to be done regarding it, we do the coordination for that. That's the main way in which I get involved in issues having to do with religion. Well, that also, and I happen to serve on the department's policy review committee, and so when we do new policies, they go through that particular committee. But in the litigation, the religion issues are raised. They're of great concern to the federal courts because of the First Amendment, of course. And so we have had a number of lawsuits over the years that affect the way you do your business and are certainly reflected in the way our policy directive is written. So some of the things that we do have to do very directly with some past court decisions we've had. I'm an attorney. As you may know, all the hearing officers who work in the institutions are required to be attorneys also. So we do have legal background and training, although we don't actually represent the department in court. That gives you just a brief idea of who I am and why I'm here and why I would presume to speak on this particular subject. I'm not going to speak on the substantive parts of what religion, various religions and how they're practiced, that sort of thing. I'm no expert on that. But if you have questions about why we do things a certain way, and if it has to do with some legal reason why we do it, I should be able to answer that. And also I have some knowledge of why the policy is written the way it is because I'm on the policy review committee.
Can we ask a question then regarding page 8 of the policy? It says prisoners in segregation units shall be visited weekly by the chaplain or more often by request. On page 8, first paragraph. Does that mean that the chaplain has to visit each individual cell of each prisoner? Is that what it means? Or the person just goes to the unit?
That's not something that's ever been the topic of a lot of discussion in any of the policy review. I suspect it's been in the policy for a while, a long time, and I would guess from the way other visits to segregation units are done is you walk through. And if somebody wants to see you, they say, hey, chaplain, I'd like to talk to you for a minute. I mean, that's the way the deputies do their walkthroughs. That's the way the healthcare staff do their walkthroughs. So I assume you could do your walkthroughs the same way, just so everybody knows who you are. Now, maybe somebody who's done that before in the audience has an insight into that. I don't know.
They have a logbook, and I sign the logbook as I enter.
Excellent. Yeah, I
and
need to
if
do
I'm
that
there
too.
for half an hour or 45 minutes, I sign when I leave. Then I make a notation of all of the prisoners that I've had a chance to see, various reasons. Then I also let my supervisor be aware.
Signing the logbook then is an indication that you've done what the policy requires,
Yes.
so that's an important step too, so that it can be audited, checked on.
All the prisoners you've seen, is that in the logbook too?
No.
I don't know if that's required or not. That would be up to your local procedure. You may want to check and see if you have an operating procedure that says how you do it. But, you know, just noting in the logbook you've been there is then verification that the policy's been followed.
Since other areas of the prison, prisoners kite us when they wish to see us and we put them on call-out, could not that mandate still be accomplished the same way as if the prisoner in segregation wants to see the chaplain and send them a kite and then go over rather than just arbitrarily walk through just to say you were there?
I think there's some feeling, and that's why the healthcare folks walk through and the deputy walks through, that when people are in segregation, they're in kind of a, and the psychologists have to go through routinely, there's in some kind of a more oppressive kind of setting, and they need you shouldn't just wait to be called. I don't know why that started. That would be my guess as to why. That people there might not think to kite, but they really, if they saw you, would take the opportunity to talk, and it's important for them to maintain contacts with people because it is a pretty bad setting to have people in, although there's good reasons why a lot of them are there.
You can repeat this for the microphone, is how are they supposed to pay, for example, for some of the materials related to the Native American religion? Some questions are brought up about the Indian benefit fund. If you can maybe go into that.
As I understand it, with the policy last day or so, but the benefit fund has money available to spend on religious items. It's made available to the individual chaplains, and then the decisions as to how to spend it. Did the benefit fund help you out with that?
Yes, they do.
Yeah, okay. But there has to be some, I mean, we've talked about this before in the sense that you can't be spending everything on one religious group. There has to be some attempt made for spreading it as evenly as possible, taking into consideration numbers, but you can't do it strictly on numbers too. So, but between the benefit fund and the chaplain, decisions could be made on how to apportion that money. If there's not money available to buy everything that the Native Americans need right away, then it may have to be something that's done over a period of time. I know another way that religious items are gotten is sometimes there's donations made specifically of items by religious groups, and that's another way to get things a little faster, and that's acceptable.
Another question has to do with, why don't I just give this to you? Why don't you just read it and then answer it, and then this one, both of those questions.
Is there any regulations to protect prisoners who wish to wear traditional hairstyles? Long braided hair is a way of living in harmony with the Creator. The department's policy has been for some time now that we don't require prisoners to have their hair cut as long as it's maintained in a neat and hygienic fashion. They can wear their hair as long as they want, and it can be braided, so it shouldn't be a problem. I've never been aware of a case in several years now where we've had any kind of an issue over haircuts. I mean, there's been some federal cases on this, and we've in some other jurisdictions they've lost where they've been requiring people to cut their hair and who didn't want to cut it for religious reasons. We've never gotten into that fight. We changed our policy 10 years ago or something. Do we have a situation?
Do you have a problem with the Rastafarians?
We haven't had a Rastafarian.
The dreadnoughts?
We haven't had a Rastafarian. I know, there might be, because the one exception to that might be, and we've never had a Rastafarian we had to deal with, is search. You have to be able to search. With the braids, you can be pretty sure that they're not hiding something in the braids, although what an officer could do is require somebody to unbraid their hair. They could say, if they really suspect something, they could say, unbraid your hair. But, you can search long, straight hair very easily. The dreadnoughts, it might be problematic. We haven't had to face that.
And hygienic, too.
Right. We have, and hopefully we never will. It's going to be, in other jurisdictions, they have been able to do something with that because of the inability to search, and also more the inability to search than anything else.
On page 2 of the policy, the second paragraph says, no one may restrict nor permit the religious group itself to restrict a prisoner from joining or attending the services of a religious group on the basis of race, color, or nationality. We know that we've got Melanic Muslims, we've got Moorish science, that will not allow anybody but one of their own race into the meetings, much less attend. How does that stack up against two groups that we know are practicing within the DOC right now? We wait for somebody to raise an issue and hope that they never will because they get intimidated out of raising it, or what?
I mean, at least theoretically, any prisoner in the department can join one of those groups.
Theoretically.
Good answer.
I wouldn't advise my son to try to join the melodics if he was a prisoner. I mean, they can. And, the question is the intimidation factor. But if a white prisoner wanted to join and go to the Melanic religious service, we would have to say, yes, that person can. We probably need to have them lock up the next day, but, they can go to the service if they want to. And we cannot allow them to openly and discriminate.
Have you ever had a complaint that you're aware of?
Several years ago, we did have one, I believe it was out of Muskegon. And, you know, that's what we said, that they cannot exclude people on the basis of race. I don't know how that was ever resolved. I mean, it was said that anybody could go to the group. Whether that lasted for any length of time or not, I don't know. But I haven't heard of anything since then. List of recognized religions as required on the top of page 3 of the new policy directive. Not to my knowledge. That's something that was put into the policy because I think it's really important, because there's been a lot of, over the years, one institution doesn't know that another institution has already recognized this religion. I think it's real important from a litigation standpoint that we get this standardized. How soon that's going to be done, I don't know.
Okay. What I'm hoping to do, in conjunction with the July 29th in-service, because Marge is going to have to review the document, and I'm trying to get the typing corrected and some other things that I need to do. As soon as I have it done, it's going to be called, what is it going to be called, Jim? It's called...
You're talking about the handbook,
right?
Oh, yeah.
Religious beliefs and practices,
Right.
which was revised
Right.
for Michigan
Right.
purposes.
Right, and what I'm doing is I'm going to forward it to Marge. Marge is going to review it, and Mr. Boland's going to review it, and my goal is to have it ready to distribute either by July 29th or prior to July 29th in service. That is my goal, and hopefully that will be covered as part of the July 29th in service, some questions that you may have regarding the handbook. But the handbook, I'm looking at trying to have it issued prior to that so that people would bring up questions or whatever.
But that handbook really goes beyond what's required by the policy, which is just a list of the recognized religions.
I don't want to issue just a list without the handbook. I want to do the list with the handbook together.
When we schedule services out in the facilities, I send out a weekly schedule out to the housing units. Should those services or meetings be scheduled by faith group? In other words, Christians can attend all Christian services, or should it be scheduled denominational? Baptists can only go to Baptist services, Pentecostals can only go to Pentecostal services. I'm trying to understand the language here in these two paragraphs.
And you were talking, the first was in the fourth paragraph on page 3? No, which page are we talking about?
Page 3 of 8.
Page 3.
On the religious meetings and practices.
All recognized religions.
Religious groups. I'm trying to get what is the definition of religious groups.
I can tell you what the intent was, is that if possible, individual denominations should be able to have meetings. Like you said, the Baptists, the Methodists, the Roman Catholics, the Melanics, all the different ones should have their own group meeting. If for some reason you don't have enough resources to do that, you have too many groups, not enough time, you could have, say, one Protestant service, one Muslim service, one Jewish service, because you just don't have the time or the resources to have all those separate denominations meeting individually. But ideally, you would have them meet individually. Now, as far as a prisoner being able to attend more than one, it's my understanding, and I think the policy says the prisoner has to designate a religion, so they designate Methodist or Baptist or whatever, so they'd only attend one of those. But if you had the groups meeting together because of a lack of resources, where all the Protestants were meeting together, then anyone who had indicated any of those Protestant religions would attend that one service.
Okay.
That's the spirit of it, and I don't know if the language conveys that adequately or not.
I have a group, probably 150, who stated their preference is just Christian. So how do you deal with that group of inmates as far as the services and scheduling? In other words, they're saying we should be able to go to all Christian services.
They need to tell you which Christian service they want to go to. We can make them, we can require them to give us a specific denomination that they want to go to the services for. If you schedule your services that way, you tell them to tell you which one they want to attend, which group they prefer.
Classifications committee meeting, and it's on the classifications form now that they declare who they are. And then I explain to them the different services we have and have them pick us.
And if they have one that's not on the list, then they'll have to go through the policy procedure for getting recognized as a new religion.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's simple.
And that will be made even more simple when we get this list of recognized religions, and everybody should be able to know what the recognized religions. You may not have that service at your facility at that point in time, but that's at least one that you would start then if it's been recognized.
we could not possibly handle all the different denominational
Yeah,
groups within our facility, so we don't even set up that way. We set up on different types of meetings within Christianity, like Bible class service and so on. But we solve it with pastoral visits on an individual basis if they have a very specific preference.
At our facility, each inmate has to have a detail within services.
Right, right.
So when I read this policy, when I set the details up, I thought I was complying with policies. So what I did was, if the inmate declared that he was a Baptist or a Presbyterian, to me that automatically meant Christian faith. According to this policy, he's of the Christian faith group. So what I did was, when I issued him a detail, the detail read, may attend Christian services, okay? Then I issued details for if an inmate declared his preference as Melanic, that was of the Islamic ordinance, so I issued a detail saying may attend Islamic services. So I issued the details according to faith group. But then I was told, and I thought I was in compliance with the policy, then I was told that I was not in compliance with the policy and that the details had to be more specific. If he declared he was Baptist, the details should read, may attend Baptist services. So that's why I brought that question up.
Right, and that was the intent, the way you were instructed to do it, to specify the individual denomination. That's what was meant. Yeah.
As part of our duties, we have to sit in on other groups' services. And I sit in on some of the, let's take for instance the more assigned services, and I listen to a lot of very racist, militant type of rhetoric, particularly directed toward a general class called Europeans. How far do we have to listen to that sort of thing? Where do they cross the line in terms of you can't say that because that is racist, that is militant? For instance, remarks like the Europeans are all going to lie to you. The only way that they're going to get their hand from off your throat is if they're looking down the barrel of a gun. It's going to take a war like this world has never seen. I talked with Parker Bay on the street about this, and I read him some of the quotes, and I said, is this a part of Morris Science Doctrine? And he said, no. I said, would you be willing to say that to the Grand Sheik of our institution? He said, yes. So I put him on the phone, and it was yes sir, no sir, yes sir, no sir. And when he was done, the guy was rather humbled by it, and but it didn't change in the meetings. And so where can we say you have crossed the line and engage in some sort of censorship as to content? Can we require a manuscript and say, you can say this?
We've had that particular problem in institutions very recently. And we've told the institutions, first they need to very carefully document, maybe even record what's being said so that we're sure that it's crossed the line, because we have the same question all the time in terms of written materials also. And if it has indeed crossed the line, as the warden reviews it and thinks, yes, this has gone beyond what's permissible, then what they've done in these institutions is told the people, if it happens again, the group services are going to be stopped. You're not going to have group services anymore, and it's stopped. And we do not have to let group services continue that contain the kind of material that, the mail policy has the list, and it talks about the kinds of things you can let in, but you can't have things that would be a threat to security because they're scurrilous attacks and those kind of things. That's the same general standards apply to the written word. And so the speech that goes on in these meetings. And so if it's something like that, you need to document it. You need to get the warden involved to see if it really is something that's going over the line. And then I like the idea of giving them a warning, saying we're not going to let you continue to have the meetings. If you're going to carry on like this, stay within the boundaries of what's permissible. And then it worked in the two instances that I'm aware of in the recent past. It stopped the groups from that kind of rhetoric going on.
Last sentence says in levels 4, 5, and 6, special meals, foods will not be allowed for any celebrations of religious holidays, religious feasts. How is the department justify quoting Ramadan then?
The wording that's in there, we realized as soon as it came out, was not real clear, and part of the problem is that other policy directive. What is meant by that is they could not have the annual banquet that a lot of religious groups have at one certain point of the year. That's different from observing Ramadan by certain kind of dietary restrictions at that point in time. It's not the same thing. Yeah, but what was meant by this is the annual banquet that you have, either, maybe it's at Christmas, maybe it's at Passover, maybe it's at some point in the year when a religious group has they can have one annual meal like that, but not in levels 4 and above. It did not mean to address the other issue of special kind of diet for religious groups. For example, observing Ramadan. Another example is Orthodox Jewish observation of kosher dietary restrictions. It's a special diet, and the wording is not very good in there. I already have that note in my policy directive that when we look at it again, we need to clean that up because that distinction isn't clear, but that was a distinction that was intended by that.
When you say, in relation to that question, 4, 5, and 6 level institutions, if you have, like, for example, level 2s in an institution, is it okay to have a banquet? For example, IMU maximum is level 6, but we have level 2, 240 level 2 prisoners. Now, how do we gauge that? I mean, we're a level 6 institution, but we can't treat those individuals like level 6 prisoners.
They should be able to the level 2 should be able to have their annual banquet because you have the same kind of thing in the regionals. And in fact, we had an issue a year or so ago, I think it was at Cotton, and the level 1 and 3s were allowed to have. Anita remembers that one. We were allowed to have their annual banquet, but the level 4s could not participate in it because they were not. So the 2s should be able to. I'm sure the warden will be happy to accommodate you. Yeah.
Page 4, paragraph 4, religious service being held by a prisoner assistant. That service must be monitored by the chaplain or appropriate staff members. When we're down into level 1s in the regional, it's being held by a prisoner, then should that be monitored, or because level 1 is judged by the warden, if they need in-room supervision or don't need in-room supervision, who's the deciding voter on that one? If the wardens are meeting and the prisoners are leaving, it's automatic. There should be someone in there.
Anytime the religious service is being led by a prisoner, the way I read that, any level, it should be staff in the room. If their service is being conducted by a volunteer or somebody, then you don't need in-room supervision. But you can't leave a prisoner. You can't leave a prisoner in charge of the group and not have anybody in the room.
Even in level 1?
Even in level 1.
But a volunteer can suffice in
right.
place of a...
Yes, no,
right.
I understand the volunteer part.
But that's what the policy says. I know that's what was intended.
Regarding medicine bags, are these allowed in the visiting rooms? And if so, what restrictions or limitations are there to these medicine bags?
Oh, I have to stay by the microphone. The medicine, I mean, when we discussed this, we met one day to talk over some of the various concerns with the Native American religion. Medicine bag was just, the way it was described to me, I would assume it would be something that would be carried or worn on the person at all times, somewhat along the lines of a cross that somebody might wear around their neck. So I would assume if a prisoner had a medicine bag, that he or she would be carrying it with them most of the time. Is that correct? That's just the impression I got from what you were saying. So
required?
No.
But cross isn't required either. I mean, under the policy, the first inquiry is it a genuine religious symbol or item? And I think the answer to that was clearly yes from the discussions that we had. The next question is it a security concern? If it is, then we have we can limit it. I didn't see anything that would be a security concern. I think Diane discussed it with Deputy Bolden, as long as it's able to be searched. That was the only, you have to be able to search it, but nothing that would be contained in there, nor the medicine bag itself, was not anything that would be a security concern. So we would have a clear legal problem if we tried to say, no, you can't have those, just because we don't like them. We can't do that.
In that issue, March, in the memo, number 4 says this, if a volunteer, Dan Boland's memo, did you have that for the Native American? That a volunteer comes in, if they have their pipe, and they do not want it searched by a female, they have the right not to bring it in and that, and we have no problem with this. Then we go into number 7 on that with the medicine bags, and it says follow 4 in regards to searching. Now, this is the prisoner's medicine bag. We're saying the prisoner has no right to get it searched by female staff or male staff, because they're in the institution. And our volunteers, but you're referring it back to, or Dan Bowden is referring it back to 4.
Oh, just put it where it is. I put it in.
Someone
But
put it in there.
it's our fault too, because we reviewed this and we missed this too, because there is a problem with that. Because, as we all know, prisoners are subject to being searched at any time, just randomly, for cause, whatever. And not only that, I believe in the search policy that officers are required to do a certain number of searches every day, and they may pick out somebody. And the female officers have to do it too. So I guess Native Americans are going to have to realize that if they're going to have a medicine bag, it may end up being searched by a female officer.
So we don't intend to say that the medicine bag only a male could.
Correct, and we're going to have to fix that in there, because the problem is we've had a similar issue with the Islamic prisoners, some of whom say that they cannot be touched by female other than their wife. I think it's just their wife, but anyway, and they object to searches by female staff. We've been sued on that issue more than once, and we've won it. We cannot be inconsistent in what we do in terms of searches with Native Americans. We're not trying to be nasty or hard-nosed. We just can't, we just are going to have to say if a female officer is searching, the person has a medicine bag. Now, I don't know if it's possible for the prisoner to be asked to take the medicine bag, open it up, and show the contents so that it wouldn't have to be touched by somebody. I don't know. If that's possible to do that, fine. If it's not, if the contents actually have to be touched, then that's going to have to be, they either have to make a choice of either not having that particular symbol or having it searched by female staff.
Data on where Satan is right now is in corrections. Is it allowable? What? It's not a recognized religion. I don't believe in any facility, but every now and then it crops up.
I don't know what you mean by Satanism.
All right, the prisoner says I'm a Satanist and I want to worship and I want to get my literature in and stuff like that.
It's two different issues if you're talking about literature versus if you're talking about coming together as a group service, a religious service. If the prisoner wants to, because Satanism is not recognized or anything like that, they would have to, Jim, go through and put together, send in liturgical practices and go through all that whole practice. Right now, we're looking at the Wicca, which is dealing with witches and warlocks. That prisoner has presented some information, sent it through to me, to CAC, and we're dealing with that issue right now. I cannot speak to what the future may hold for Wicca. But as far as Satanism, I don't know anything about that. That is not recognized. But when it comes to literature, you're supposed to follow the policy on prisoner mail.
Yeah, and that really should, the literature should be handled under the mail policy, and the chaplain wouldn't even necessarily have to be involved in that. I mean, it's a question of whether it violates any of the prohibitions in the mail policy, and it can be allowed in, even if it's something that we would not allow group service in that particular religion. We may still allow in a lot of the literature under the mail policy.
I'm also getting requests for Masonic Lodge establishments now. Is there anything being considered in Lansing?
No requests have come in.
No requests have come in. Not that I've seen.
It's starting to come.
Way in the back.
Any statements that are made verbally in a meeting could be rejected on grounds of prisoner mail policy prohibition for any statements made in print.
What I made that statement was saying that you could use the guidelines in that mail policy as the kinds of things that would be not allowed.
Yeah, I'm aware of that, but I'm asking a different question. Say I heard in a Morris Science Temple meeting some statements that would represent a scurrilous attack on another religion or racial slur, or as it's written in the prisoner mail policy, could also be reasons or grounds for closing down that meeting, correct?
It could be, but I mean, we have to be real careful here. One statement should not cause you to go through the hassle of closing down a meeting. We're talking about people using that as a forum for putting forth really objectionable views. And what I'm saying is if you've got that kind of a practice going on, you need to make your warden aware of it and let the warden know what's being said. Religious group meetings should not be closed down lightly, but I'm just saying we don't have to put up with endless diatribes going on in these meetings. One possibly racist statement, I would say you might want to just let it go by. You don't have to, but closing down a group meeting should only be done if there's a serious threat to security, which I think you could argue there is when you get people in there speaking, talking about violence on a regular basis.
Well, we have nothing in
or
writing
extensively.
as far as that goes.
Well, there is something in the policy, in the religion policy about group meetings, not, suspending group meetings. Can't remember exactly where it is, but it does talk about in the middle, on the middle of page 3, it talks about ordinarily they'll be permitted to hold at least one service unless holding of group services would constitute a threat to the order and security of the institution. If a recognized group is not permitted to hold group services, this shall be reported to the BCF Deputy Director. So you have to meet the standard of it being a threat to the order and security of the institution, and I would think that your warden would want it to go through him or her in terms of reporting it to the Deputy Director. So if you think you have a situation that meets that policy standard for suspending group services, you need to follow through with the warden.
I have a question a little different than this yours is on the. It's back on page 4 of the policy, in the aspect of paragraph 4. It seems to me that paragraph 4 is putting a responsibility of monitoring groups back on the chaplain, where the first paragraph at the top of the page says is inappropriate use of resources to assign duties to chaplains which are primarily performed by custodial staff. This is a concern for chaplains who are doing 2 facilities, in which we find custodial staff not wanting to help us out and sit in some of these meetings, yet we're trying to run a religious program. And this seems to be an issue, because it depends how you read that page. It says both, says it both ways. And I'd like to know what's in that policy. Is it chaplain's primary responsibility to sit in on these programs, or is it a custodial program?
The one at the top, though, was requiring in-room supervision, staff supervision for religious services being conducted by outside volunteers at certain custody levels. And they're saying the staff who do the in-room supervision when you have a person who's an outside minister or chaplain conducting a service should probably be custodial staff. You shouldn't be using a chaplain to be sitting in while another religious person is conducting a service. But the one down at the bottom is more intended to have somebody monitoring what's going on in that religious service who has some background in training to know what's going on. So it should be the chaplain in that situation, because the prisoner is allegedly leading a religious service. And so having a custodial person in there with no religious training would not be appropriate in that situation. So it's 2 different situations that are being addressed.
They're again about the sweat lodge. Now, how can that be monitored when it's closed and the prisoner is supposedly going to be allowed to do this? 'Cause I'm against that part of letting the prisoner run the sweat lodge.
That's a good question.
The sweat lodge is going to be, I thought when we discussed this, that the sweat lodges, that we have volunteers who are, from religious volunteers who are going to do the sweat lodges.
But what's coming out today is that it not be the case.
Well, then by what we have said for levels 3 and below will be allowed to sweat lodge. We don't have a volunteer, because staff members will not be required to participate in the sweat lodge, then you would not have the sweat lodge. The way I'm looking at it, Mark. I mean,
you'd need it.
If you're not going to have a volunteer in there, we need to know what's happening if you're going to have a prisoner in there. And the fact that we're not allowing staff members to participate in the sweat lodge because of some of the health hazards and whatever.
Okay, so the policy is addressing that and covering it.
Right, that you'd have the volunteer, and then the supervision would be up to the warden, the levels 1 through 3. That's why we didn't have them at 4 and above, because you'd have to have the in-room supervision even if you had the volunteer. Jim?
I wanted to ask a question about prisoner marriages. It says on page 7 that staff chaplains shall either form prisoner marriages or make arrangements with other clergy, etc. Now, to some extent, the chaplain could be mandated or directed by the warden or the ADW or whomever the authority is in the institution to perform the service contrary to his own, say, moral or religious beliefs. With the, for instance, with the confines or restrictions when you cannot find anybody in the community who would come in from the outside because of the isolation or because of the non-availability. And then if the chaplain decides that this is contrary to my religious beliefs and faith and practices to do this, this could create an enormous hassle. I'm wondering if there's a consideration to change the directive shall to may.
The intent with that was not what you just described, and I don't know of any situation that has arisen where anyone has been forced to perform a marriage ceremony with any of the chaplains. I think we need to know if that happens, because what the intent was more that, and I can't remember specifics, but we had a couple of complaints over the years about prisoners who wanted to get married who were not, and the chaplain wasn't performing the ceremony, and that was perfectly appropriate because they weren't, they couldn't based on their faith or something, but appropriate endeavors weren't being made to find somebody on the outside to do it. And the concern was more that prisoners have to be treated equally. And we have a chaplain who may be of one religious denomination, and that's perfectly appropriate, but if the chaplain cannot perform the marriage ceremony for whatever reason, then they need to make an effort to find somebody who can. It is not intended to mandate that chaplain will violate their own faith or their own moral code, whatever, by performing a marriage that they are not allowed to do. It was more intended to say you make every possible effort to find somebody appropriate to perform the marriage ceremony if you can't or won't do it yourself. And I mean, maybe it should have been explained more completely, because I know the wording used to be may, and it was more intended to convey the idea that you have to make every effort to treat all prisoners equally. Don't make moral judgments, so to speak, about whether they should get married or whatever. You may not want to do it yourself, you may not be able to do it yourself, that's perfectly appropriate, but do whatever you can to find someone in the community who is appropriate, who can or will do this, perform the ceremony. If you totally can't, then I would say, you tell the prisoner that and ask them for suggestions and say, where do you think we could find somebody? Do you know somebody who could perform this ceremony? Because, there was a U.S. Supreme Court decision within the last couple of years that said that marriage was a constitutional right, because there were some departments of corrections that were not allowing prisoners to marry at all. And the U.S. Supreme Court said that was not appropriate because it was a violation of the prisoner's constitutional rights. So since we have a constitutional right involved here, we just wanted to be sure that the point was made that you have to make equal efforts on behalf of all the prisoners. That's what's intended. If it causes problems in a particular context, let Diane know, and we may need to make some changes before the policy is revised. I don't know of any problems right now.
No, but there are some chaplains who are not, to use the words ordained clergy, who have no legal right or church right or state right to perform the marriage.
Right, then they're going to have to always make outside contacts.
If they, the problem comes in if they can.
If they can, but they have to make efforts to do so.
Mary, I carry that. Would it be appropriate to contact, I know we don't have justices of the peace anymore, but to have a legal person to come in to perform the legal state required ceremony?
I suppose you could, yes.
And you can find one.
If you can find somebody who will do it and that's acceptable to the prisoner, yeah, that would be appropriate.
Can the warden do it as the captain of the ship?
That's easy. No.
What are the grounds that can deny a marriage? The person is a codependent with the other person on the same case. So if the person, I have one individual, she wants to get married, and the reason that she's in is because she shot at the boyfriend. Now she wants to marry the boyfriend. What grounds do you deny marriage on?
I can't think of any offhand. I mean, if they're legally entitled to be married, then no limits, no grounds. We do not, that's exactly the kind of thing we should not be doing. If they're already married, then they're not legally eligible to be married again. So there's a legal restriction. That's about it. The rest of them.
He spoke in terms of someone having mental problems. That is a cause of contacting warden.
That could be, but then you'd have to go into probate court and see if the person was incompetent and had to have a guardian appointed. I mean, you don't make those kind of judgments without the probate court involvement. Otherwise, they are also legally able to contract and be married.
The standard for that generally in the department has been
that if they're locking not in a site facility, that they are able to make that informed consent. So that really is not anything that we can deny.
No, you can. I just said that too. I mean, you may have a suspicion that somebody is mentally ill, however, and you would not be precluded from pursuing that, but they are competent, even if they're mentally ill, to make those kind of decisions unless someone has, in the probate court, has declared that they are incompetent and need a guardian to make those kind of legal decisions for them. So you have very, very, very few grounds that you could deny somebody the right to get married on, as long as they're legally in a position where they can do that. Yeah.
I guess I'd like to ask you to issue a written clarification on the policy issue concerning clergy people, chaplains marrying people, because the way it's worded now, it does say that if you can't find someone outside to do it, you will do it.
Has that been a problem? I hate to.
No, but that's because my chaplain said, okay, if that's the way it is, that's the way it is.
Yeah, I think it's also fair.
And they performed a marriage ceremony that they were not.
I don't know that he actually did it, but I know that when I brought it to his attention that now the thing had been changed from may to shall, that meant that if he couldn't find it, he just basically accept it.
We'll discuss it. I need to find out from Diane and Deputy Bolden what, we can't just issue a memo that changes the policy. We may be able to issue a clarification as to what the policy means, if it is a significant enough problem.
I would just like to say for myself, if it came to that and someone said to me, you shall, I would just say, go fly a kite.
Well, what you probably should do instead is call Diane, and we'll settle it through channels instead of getting yourself in trouble, because we can settle it that way.
I'm not going to say it that way, I'm just saying that flippantly in a sense. But it would become a problem for me if somebody asked me to marry a Jewish couple. I would flat say no. As a Christian, I can't do that. And then if someone were to say you shall, we'd be in court because the state is telling the church what to do.
I think we should deal with that on an individual basis.
Of course.
And I have not had those issues.
Yeah, we have enough problems that happen tomorrow without worrying about the ones that haven't happened. At least I do.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, and you need to let us know if somebody is trying to force that issue. But
broad question, and that has to do with religious lawsuits. Is there a report? I just don't know what to ask her. I'm interested in seeing how many lawsuits are filed a year by prisoners in the Michigan Department of Corrections on religion. What happens to them and how much it costs the state if we lost.
I think religion is one of the categories, as I recall, that we file our lawsuits under, so we do know how many were filed in that category. We don't keep statistics on outcomes for lots of different reasons, but we do know how many were filed. If you're interested in that, I can get that information for you. I can tell you that they don't cost us a lot. Most of our lawsuits don't, just because you don't get big damages in prisoner lawsuits. What they cost us more are the sort of hidden costs of staff time, Attorney General's office time, spent defending the lawsuit, and then changes in the policy that have to be done as a result of usually injunctions that the court issues at the end of the lawsuit. You don't get money damages a lot out of religious lawsuits. You get orders telling you to do things differently from then on. But I can tell you how many are filed, and I think we have them back for several years in terms of how many in that category. I'll let you know that.
I would like to express my thanks to Father Vineyard, to Steve Winchester, and also to Bea and to Bucko, and to Andrew, who's not here, and to Benita, who had a family obligation that she had to leave for. I'd like to express my thanks to all the presenters for being here. I really appreciate it. I felt it was a very informational day. I hope all of you felt it was very, very beneficial. I'm very new to this. I'm learning. I'm going to make mistakes. Help me along. I have no problem with that. So let's work together, call me. And normally it does take me a couple days to return calls because I'm going for an institution or meetings or whatever. So please do not think that I'm not interested. It does take me a little bit of time, right, Crenshaw? I may not do it the same day, it may take me a couple days, but I will get back to you. So please call, ask questions. We will work together. Thank you for your time and attention. And if you don't mind, I'd like to give them a hand because they work very hard.